Chapter 549. Half an hour later, Grimm saw the pitiful Level 2 Draconian Zacha. He could tell that the Draconian was lucky to not have been contaminated by the void energy during the explosion. However, at the same time, it was also unfortunate that it had become food for the lightning dragon arms. Grimm had thought that the Draconian was long dead, but when he used the earth elemental to wrap it up, he found that it was barely breathing. Without hesitation, Grimm took out a health potion and fed it to the Draconian. Unfortunately, while it might be able to save its life, it could not heal its limbs and a portion of its torso that had been devoured by the Thunder Dragon. If it wanted to recover further, it would have to move to the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda. It would take at least a few months to fully recover from such a terrifying injury. Even though there were many ways to quickly regrow one's flesh, they were all caused by the sudden stimulation of one's life force in a life-or-death situation. Once the spell was withdrawn, the damaged parts of the body would need to be carefully nurtured and repaired. However, with the powerful physique of a Level 2 Draconian, as long as it had enough food and energy, it would be able to recover at a speed several times faster than a wizard with a weaker physique. Even though Draconian Zacha's life was hanging by a thread, it was still conscious. When Grimm saved it from the Thunder Dragon, it even used its weak mental energy to send a message of gratitude. Even though he did not know how sincere the message was, Grimm saw a chance to subdue it. Grimm did not have the time to slowly nurture the Level 2 Draconian, so he handed it over to the poison centipede and let it do whatever it wanted. As for him, he once again focused all his attention on the silent battle underground. In less than a quarter of an hour, the Earth Elemental army that Grimm had built with all his might had been destroyed. The base value of 20 wizard Earth Elementals had reached 50,000 magical crystals. If they were sold in the wizard market, they would be worth around 300,000 magic crystals. The death of the 20 Earth Elementals only brought Grimm more benefits than the Thunder Dragon arms. The Thunder Dragon arms that it had just accumulated was once again used up. Although the Earth Elemental's feedback showed that the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon was on the verge of collapsing, it seemed like it could be brought down with just a little more effort. However, Grimm still didn't dare to be careless. He didn't dare to fight in person. He could only command the Earth Elemental Devil Puppet to circle around the Lightning Dragon, waiting for an opportunity to launch a sneak attack. With them around, the Thunder Dragon wouldn't be able to dig its way out. Under Grimm's command, the Earth Elemental Puppet even destroyed a large portion of the tunnel behind the Thunder Dragon. In this way, the opponent would not even have a path of retreat. Once the Thunder Dragon was surrounded, Grimm sent one Earth Elemental Puppet after another. He wanted to use this opportunity to subdue the frightening Tier 3 Thunder Dragon. However, it was a pity that every time the Devil Centipede emissary was killed by the other party with a single claw strike. Then, a new round of battles would ensue. After several fruitless attempts, Grimm hardened his heart and stopped sending emissaries to summon the Thunder Dragon. Instead, he focused all his attention on killing the isolated Tier 3 Thunder Dragon. In the past, Grimm wouldn't even dare to think about such a thing. However, due to a fortuitous encounter, he had unexpectedly bumped into a big fish. Grimm would never forgive himself if he lost such an opportunity. The excavation of the ground had stopped. All the goblins had laid down their flags and drums, waiting for news. As the main characters of the battle, Grimm and Bliss hid in a small wooden hut and a tent respectively. Both of them remotely commanded their subordinates to harass and attack the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon in the tunnel. No matter how strong the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon was, the sky was its stage. And underground, it was destined to be a nightmare for the rest of its life. If Arms tried to dig his way out, the Earth Elemental Puppet would charge into the tunnel and harass him, using its innate ability to strengthen the soil around the tunnel. Although this would not be able to solidify the soil into stone, it would increase the difficulty of digging by more than tenfold. If arms gave up on digging and attacked the earth elemental puppet instead, the earth elemental puppets would burrow into the ground and use their earth spears and mud spells to entangle the thunder dragon. Using this method, hundreds of devil centipedes and thorny scorpions roamed around the thunder dragon, taking turns to attack, reducing the consumption of the earth elemental essence. After all, the thunder dragon and thorny scorpions couldn't replenish their earth elemental essence in the goblin plane. However, one side was stronger than the other. As the two fought underground, it was all about who could last and who would fall first. In this aspect, the thunder dragon was clearly at a disadvantage. This underground battle lasted for half a month, before the exhausted thunder dragon arms collapsed and became a captive of the earth elemental puppet army. Grimm had obtained a Tier 2 dragonoid and a Tier 3 thunder dragon in one fell swoop. He was so excited that he could barely contain himself. However, an even greater surprise had yet to come. Following the tunnel that the thunder dragon had dug, the two thorny scorpions dispatched by the insect lich arrived at the scene of the spatial furnace explosion. The area had become a strange void of energy. Anything that entered the void would be reduced to dust particles that were difficult to discern with the naked eye before being ejected again. The dust particles that were ejected contained extremely powerful energy radiation. One of the thorny scorpions had gotten too close and was hit by a pillar of dust, its body disintegrating immediately. From afar, the void of energy looked like a huge black rock with a diameter of 10 meters, with fine energy particles lingering around it. Amidst the terrifying rumbling sounds, the center of the void of energy emitted a dazzling multicolored energy. The energy was filtered through the layer of dust on the outer shell of the rock, and was no longer as chaotic and violent as it was when it first appeared. It interacted with the laws of the goblin plane, turning into waves of extremely pure earth elemental essence that dissipated into the surroundings. Bliss was obviously at a loss when he saw this strange scene, but Grimm, who had an encyclopedia of magi in his head, recognized it at a glance. Beat. Discovered a wild source of earth elemental essence. Based on analysis, the concentration of the earth elemental essence is violent. Not suitable for magi to consume directly. A source of earth elemental essence. Grimm's eyes lit up. To be honest, this was a wild source of earth elemental essence that had yet to be refined or tamed. Although it had been created by a strange explosion, it matched the description of a source of earth elemental essence in Grimm's memories. The so-called source of earth elemental essence was just a name given to it by magi. In reality, it was just a point where the energy of the void and the plane intersected. Here, the violent energy of the void would come into contact with the plane, resulting in an energy siphon. It was because of the existence of a source of earth elemental essence that the plane could receive energy from the void, allowing it to maintain a stable amount of earth elemental essence. As for the goblin plane, it was precisely because of the lack of such a wild source of mana that the magical elements within the plane were thin. Hence, it became a notorious low magical plane. Grimm could not help but sigh at the strangeness of fate. If the rank 3 Thunder Dragon had known that there was a source of earth elemental essence at the core of the explosion, it definitely would not have buried itself in digging. If it had stayed within the range of the source of earth elemental essence, it would have replenished its lightning energy. At that time, who in the entire Goblin Plane could stop a rank 3 Thunder Dragon at its peak? However, it was obviously scared out of its wits by the terrifying explosion. All it wanted to do was to leave this place, but it did not know that it had missed a chance that fate had arranged for it to make a comeback. The source of earth elemental essence was a gift from the heavens to powerful magical creatures. However, for those who were not strong enough, it was like a forbidden land of death. Rank 1 Magi were still too weak. Once they got close to the source of earth elemental essence, there was a high chance that they would be assimilated into a demonic spirit without a body. As a rank 2 Magus, Grimm's body and mind had already been assimilated into the earth elemental essence. Not only would he not be harmed when he got close to the source of Earth Elemental Essence, he could even feel the dense aura of Earth Elemental Essence. If he used up all his Earth Elemental Essence in battle, he would only need to bathe in the source of Earth Elemental Essence for 5 minutes to replenish his Earth Elemental Essence. To an elemental magus, a treasure like this was comparable to a holy artifact. Moreover, Grimm remembered that it was recorded in the books that this source of mana could be shifted away through witchcraft. If he could add it to the magic furnace that he had completed his initial design, he could increase the furnace's power by more than 10 times. Standing 20 meters away from the black sphere, Grimm tried to sense the structure of the source of Earth Elemental Essence. However, no matter how hard he tried, the void at the center of the source of Earth Elemental Essence was just pure darkness in his mind. Regardless of whether it was his spells or his mental perception, he could not get any feedback from the source. The moment his mental force entered the source of Earth Elemental Essence, it would be strangely devoured. Yes, it was devoured, not gone missing. Grimm stood there for a long time before sighing helplessly. The source of Earth Elemental Essence was indeed mysterious and wonderful. With his current strength, he did not have the qualifications to investigate its secret. After setting up a spatial marker for the area where the source of Earth Elemental Essence was, he tried to seal it. Now, it was time for Grimm to roam the underground. The terrifying underground world that a rank 3 Thunder Dragon could not freely traverse, but Grimm could traverse it as if it was flat ground. What he relied on was the powerful support that he relied on, the elemental puppet. Originally, he wanted to hand over the task of developing Steel City to the insect Lich Bliss. However, it seemed that even he had underestimated the value of this place. Let alone the planar gate that had yet to reveal itself, even the things he had obtained so far had greatly exceeded his expectations. Chapter 550. Above the Yate Plateau, a black figure was flying close to the ground. Under the illumination of the huge moon in the sky, the black shadow was tall and slender. Looking from afar, it was full of a seductive feeling. But what was frightening was that such a beautiful and seductive figure belonged to a non-human. A pair of wide, flat, gray bat wings spread out behind her. When she glided close to the ground, she was silent and fast like a ghost. She clearly couldn't see any pursuers or abnormalities behind her, but this black figure was like a panicked bird, hurriedly flitting across grasslands, villages, and rivers. She didn't dare to stop at any place for even a moment. Even with her strength, she would be exhausted after flying non-stop for a few hours. Every time this happened, she would dive down and rush into a certain place in the forest. Then, there would be some wild movements of some large creatures. However, these voices came out quickly and disappeared just as quickly. After a while, when the black shadow flapped her wings and soared into the sky, there were already 1 or 2 withered bodies of large forest beasts somewhere in the forest. In just a few minutes, the blood in the bodies of these large beasts had been sucked clean. Under the illumination of the moonlight, the moment the black figure leaped into the air, a charming but worried face was revealed. Mary. She was the vampire wizard Grimm had sent to spy on Lester. Maybe the strange atmosphere tonight had scared away the nearby forest beasts, or maybe Mary had sucked so much blood that there was not a trace of blood leaking out. When the sound of flapping wings disappeared in the distant darkness, the forest became quiet again. Until a strange black shadow descended upon this place. There were no signs of living beings in the forest. Only the people with the sharpest senses could vaguely feel that the light and shadow seemed to have dimmed a little. Under the bright moonlight, a thin black fog spread in the forest, covering the 2 withered bodies of the beasts hidden in the bushes. As if it had found something, 2 scarlet eyes suddenly lit up in the black fog, staring in the direction that Mary escaped to without blinking. Soon after, a cold and ruthless male voice rang out from the mist. She actually has the aura of my bloodline. Strange, could it be that some experimental subject wasn't cleaned up? No, I have to try activating bloodline summoning. As the red light flashed in the black mist, a faintly discernible strange fluctuation followed the strange bloodline connection and rippled toward a certain place in the distance. However, at this moment, Mary had already flown 50 miles away. But just as she was flapping her large bat wings and flying close to the treetops, an indescribable spiritual call entered her mind. Like a speeding train suddenly stepping on the brakes, Mary's originally light and elegant flying posture suddenly came to an abrupt stop. Her whole body curled up into a ball, breaking countless branches and vines along the way, and fell into the jungle in a sorry state. This sudden fall almost made her dizzy and confused, unable to distinguish between north, south, east, and west. But before she could regain consciousness, her body's strong instincts actually made her jump up, turn around, and run in the direction she came from. Before she could run 5 meters, Mary's consciousness suddenly sobered up, and she immediately regained control of her body. Thus, she suddenly stopped in her tracks. Although her footsteps had stopped, the two consciousnesses were still fiercely trying to regain control of her body. Of course, Mary's consciousness was trying to escape that terrifying demon as fast as possible, but her instincts kept urging her to return to the source of her bloodline. The two consciousnesses were fiercely fighting on all levels of her body, neither willing to let go of even the slightest bit of control over her body. Thus, the originally charming and gorgeous Mary seemed to have ADHD and could not even stand steadily. 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, one hand turning left, the other turning right. Even the muscles on her face began to violently spasm. Her whole body was a mess because of the two consciousnesses tangling with each other. Although the vampire blood flowing in her body had the bloodline imprint of that vampire Lester, she could not resist his orders. But she was not a blood descendant created by him using the embrace, so her soul was not under his control. When the soul and bloodline instincts clashed, both sides could not come to an end, and neither could completely suppress the other and completely control this body. After a long time of bloodline summoning, that blood descendant did not come. Lester, who was hidden in the black mist, finally showed a surprised expression. What a strange bloodline descendant! She could actually resist the summoning of the source of her bloodline. This is unbelievable! Lester's interest in such a strange bloodline descendant was undoubtedly growing. He stopped the bloodline summoning ritual, and the black mist condensed into a pair of giant bat wings that could almost cover the entire forest. As the bat wings flapped slightly, he disappeared on the spot and flew towards the direction of the strange bloodline fluctuation. The enemy was approaching, the strange consciousness in her body had just calmed down, and Mary, who was almost exhausted, did not even have the time to catch her breath before she felt the source of her bloodline approaching from afar. Mary, who had not felt afraid after fighting with the body's instincts for a long time, was immediately frightened to the point that her face turned pale. Without hesitation, she flew up to the sky, flapped her huge bat wings, and fled as fast as she could. In order to get rid of this terrifying enemy, she even used 2 spells, Energy Burst and Extreme Flight. Lester could make her obediently walk back and surrender with just a thought from dozens of miles away. If she really met him face to face, she might not even have the thought of resisting him. So she decided to go all out. She used wizard items, scrolls, magic wands, and potions. Mary used everything that could increase her flying speed, just to get as far away from the demon as possible. With her strong mental consciousness, as long as she was more than 100 miles away from him, Lester would probably not be able to sense her specific location. With this simple and stubborn thought, Mary flew at top speed, playing a game of cat and mouse with the terrifying Level 2 vampire Lester on the Yate Highlands Scattered Tower Forest area, Ferd South City. In a secret room on the top floor of the Wizard's Pagoda, Sanazar, Forgan, and Kogan gathered for a secret meeting. As the core wizards of the Salubo family, they had a routine meeting like this almost every other year. Due to the multitude of family affairs this year, The number of regular meetings had also increased. During the regular meeting, Wizard Corgan was the one who quickly reported what had happened in the family over the past year. He reported the distribution of the family's resources, the changes in the internal personnel, the statistics of the advancement of the apprentices. After he was done, Corgan took out a small piece of paper from his sleeve and explained what had happened in the Flame Monarch's wizard pagoda. Grimm lived in seclusion within the wizard's pagoda, not taking a single step out. They hadn't seen him for half a year. The wizard's pagoda had recruited another 2 resident wizards. A month ago, a few core wizards in the wizard's pagoda had disappeared for a period of time. Goblin Cabby had also disappeared, but Chief Butler Gargamel was still around. Half a month later, Meryl and Mary returned, but the insect wizard Bliss, the poison centipede Ender, and the mechanic wizard Sabrina were still nowhere to be found. 7 days ago, Mary left for the scattered southwest of Tallinn. Her destination was unknown. Recently, there had been a large number of records of the resources of the wizard's pagoda going in and out. It seemed like Grimm's camp was up to something. Almost all of them were the recent developments of the Flame Monarch, as well as the details of important events. Looking at this, the movements of the Flame Monarch were clear to see. Wizard Forgan patiently waited for Wizard Corgan to finish reading all the information. He could not help but bow and ask, "Lord Sanazar, do you think? Is there any doubt?" Level 3 Wizard Sanazar's shrill voice came from within the purple fog. "That lad is really capable. He only advanced a few days ago, and he already dares to launch a plane invasion. He's really daring." Even though he had already guessed it, Forgan was not as certain as Sanazar. He asked doubtfully, "My lord, can he do it with his abilities? That's an invasion of a plane." Forgan, you're too conservative." Sanazar could not help but mock him. "If I were you, I wouldn't doubt if he dared to do it. I would only wonder where he got the coordinates from. With Grimm's wealth, he should not be able to buy a world waymark for a small plane from the Silver Alliance." Wizard Corgan could not help but ask, could it be that the girl in the north provided it? Hearing this, Sanazar thought for a moment and agreed with this idea. How could a mere rank 2 fire wizard like Grimm have the wealth to buy a world waymark from the 3 major organizations? This idea was too ridiculous. The biggest possibility was that he had received help from the outside world. With Grimm's social circle, the only one who could provide him with such help was Alice, who was in the Dragonbone Waste in the north. So, did the few magi who disappeared from the Flame Monarch die in another plane, or were they stationed there? According to Sanazar and Forgan's opinions, the truth was most likely the former. After all, with Grimm's strength, he could only mobilize 6 to 7 magi at his peak, and most of them were new magi. With this kind of strength, unless it was a miniature plane that was lacking in resources, they would not be able to take it. Even if they did, 5 to 6 magi in a small plane would be like sprinkling a pinch of pepper into a small stream. They would not even be able to taste it before disappearing without a trace. Wanting to rule a plane was just wishful thinking. There were too few magi, and it was difficult to form an effective governing structure. They would not be able to successfully develop the resources and wealth of other planes. On top of that, the mana in low-grade planes was thin, and was not suitable for magi to train. For the magi stationed there, this was undoubtedly a great torment. Presumably, Grimm would not be willing to be stationed in a low-grade plane that lacked resources and mana all year round. He would have to take care of all the miscellaneous affairs of the secular world, while his own strength would not improve at all. It seemed like Grimm had already suffered a great loss. Chapter 551. It had to be said that after a cruel planar war, the victors would always obtain the most generous spoils of war. A month later, after the local goblin excavation team cleared away tens of millions of mud, debris, and all kinds of miscellaneous items, they finally overcame all kinds of difficulties and dug through the hard soil and rock layers, allowing the city of steel that was buried almost 1,000 meters underground to see the light of day once more. Actually, it could not be considered underground. After all, the Steel City used to be located on the peak of a towering mountain, but it had been buried along with the collapse of the mountain. After clearing away the debris above, the exposed remains of the Steel City showed everyone the violence and ferocity of the great explosion that day. Most of the metal buildings were already broken and distorted beyond recognition. Many of the metal components had even changed their original attributes due to the attack of the energy storm, becoming a little closer to magic iron alloy. However, just as the hundreds of construction machines were operating at full power, using huge chainsaws to cut these metal components into suitable sizes, and then transported them to the mining pit by elevators, something unexpected happened. Under the guidance of a mysterious force, a large pile of twisted and broken metal components suddenly twisted and transformed into a metal giant with a height of 7 to 8 meters under the watchful eyes of the crowd, along with a series of loud cracking sounds. A crude and crude metal body, broken engineering cables that crackled and emitted sparks, a crooked and twisted metal head, and a metal fist with huge cracks on it. Even though this metal giant was simple and crude to the point that it could not be looked at directly, its 8-meter-tall body and heavy iron fist still caused a destructive blow to the nearby construction machines. With a punch, a construction machine would shrink by half. With a kick, a construction machine would fly into the air, directly falling apart in the air. This strange metal giant was like a tiger that had entered a pack of wolves, beating everyone into a sorry state. Soon after, 5 construction machines were destroyed by its hands, and the goblin mechanics inside became indiscernible dark spots on the dark soil. After all, this was an excavation site, and most of the activities here were all kinds of construction machines. They were not combat magic machines, so they all looked stupid and crude, with slow reactions. Their metal bodies were also not equipped with any combat weapons. Making them fight against a killing machine while emitting white smoke and wielding chainsaws and metal drills was indeed a bit too much. When the few battle magic machines in the field saw this, they immediately roared and charged forward at full power, using a continuous barrage of goblin fire arrows and goblin rapid-fire cannons to blast the guy that suddenly appeared full of holes, metal fragments flying everywhere. However, just as the battle magic machines were about to achieve victory, the metal giant waved its arms wildly and forced the battle magic machines away, before striding towards the burning construction machinery. With a loud roar, it inserted its suddenly liquefied arms into the wreckage of the construction machine. In the next second, a strange incident that left all the gnomes flabbergasted happened. The construction machine, which had been covered in black smoke a moment ago and had lost its ability to move, suddenly came to life. Its body that was already torn apart once again split into tens of thousands of tiny engineering and mechanical parts, and then, like birds returning to their nests, they surged into the metal giant's body. The metal giant that was originally 8 meters tall suddenly devoured a broken construction machine. The huge metal body grew taller again with a creaking sound that made one's teeth ache and legs go soft. It was now 10 meters tall. Many of the metal parts that originally belonged to the construction machines were also transferred to its body. As the gigantic metal chainsaw let out a deafening roar, the metal giant that was originally unarmed now had a metal chainsaw in its left hand and a metal drill in its right hand. Its chest and back were covered with a layer of glowing metal armor. It actually armed itself. As if it had noticed its strange metal ability, the metal giant blocked the attacks of the battle magic machines while leaping towards the other damaged construction machines around the battlefield. Just like that, it forcefully withstood the attacks of the 6 battle magic machines and absorbed the damaged construction machines into its body. In the blink of an eye, it had become a 15-meter-tall metal giant with all kinds of strange equipment wrapped around its body. At this moment, as the metal composition increased, it became more and more unstoppable. The battle magic machines that were able to force it to run away no longer dared to approach its body. They could only fight it from afar. When one of the battle magic machines could not dodge in time, the metal giant's fist smashed into its chest. The metal plate was severely dented, and the sound of the gnome mechanic spurting out blood could be heard. Following that, blood flowed out from the inside. After devouring the battle magic machine, the metal giant that originally only had primitive mechanical weapons actually transformed itself. The metal parts on its body were modified into gnome rapid-fire cannons with shocking attack power. Countless black cannon muzzles extended out of its gigantic body, and the fist-sized metal bullets instantly turned the remaining 5 battle magic machines into sieve. This time, the gnomes completely collapsed. One after another, the gnome mechanics crazily crawled out of the construction machines and gathered with the other gnomes. They were like a group of ants that had their nest blown up as they desperately rushed to the dirt road and the elevators around the pit. Pushing and shoving, crying and screaming, the bottom of the pit in the excavation site instantly turned into a mess. However, just as the gnomes were scrambling to escape from the terrifying metal giant that could never be killed, a blinding scarlet sun suddenly rose from the bottom of the pit. Following that, a terrifying, pure white pillar of light crossed over their heads and struck the center of the metal giant's chest from afar. This pillar of light had a diameter of 1 meter. It looked ordinary, but it had a terrifying temperature that left one speechless. After being struck by the pillar of light, the metal parts within the range of the pillar of light instantly melted and flowed down like hot wax. The metal giant seemed to have sensed danger, and frantically struggled left and right in an attempt to escape from the pillar of light. However, the pillar of light seemed to have a mind of its own. No matter which direction the metal giant ran in, it would always follow it closely, never leaving its chest. As if knowing that it could no longer escape from the attack of the pillar of light, the metal giant suddenly stopped and roared. Hundreds of black cannon muzzles extended out of its body with a strange sound, instantly firing at the source of the pillar of light. The huge metal bullets and the light of flames interacted in the air, immediately turning the excavation site into a terrifying battlefield. However, the battle between the two only lasted for 7 seconds before the metal giant was defeated. In the hands of the Grade 2 fire wizard Grimm, the light of flames had unparalleled destructive power. The metal giant's 3-meter-thick body was penetrated by the pure white pillar of light, and it directly penetrated the mud wall 50 meters behind it, forming a large hole. The center of the metal giant's chest seemed to be the weak point of the metal giant. With that spot penetrated, the metal giant lost its ability to fight. It swayed a few times before falling heavily to the ground. Grimm walked towards the gigantic body of the metal monster with determined step. Although he was 2 meters tall, which was considered a big guy among humans, in front of this strange metal monster, he was still as small as a bean next to a giant cheese. A crack suddenly appeared in the ground beside the metal giant, and thousands of black beetles surged out. Shortly after, they condensed into the black-robed insect which Bliss. "Master, why does this fellow look so familiar?" "Of course it looks familiar." Grimm had a disdainful smile on his face, "because it's also an old friend of ours." "You mean it's that fellow?" Insect which Bliss asked hesitantly. "Humph, I knew Grade 3 fellows wouldn't die so easily. That Thunder Dragon is still alive, so what's so surprising about Gar's Ruvi being alive as well?" After saying that, Grimm's body exploded into a ball of flames, appearing on the metal giant's chest. He reached in with his hand that was burning with golden flames, and pulled out a strange brain the size of a human's head. There were more than 10 tentacles dangling from its body. Gar's Ruvi was once the size of a small mountain, but at this moment, his body was no bigger than a human's brain. Grimm's blazing light had pierced through the top left of his brain, and had burned away almost a third of his brain. Grimm used his hand to push away the tentacles hanging from the broken brain, and found that it was limp and lifeless. After all, anyone who had a third of their brain burned away would not be able to survive. Master, is it still alive? Why can't I sense any signs of life? Did you kill it just now? Insect which Bliss turned into a cloud of black mist and flew onto the metal giant's body, and solidified beside Grim. Dead? That's good. Grim's smile grew wider. Since it's dead, I'll burn it all. After saying that, the flames on Grim's hand burned even brighter. Not dead, not dead. I'm not dead. Garz Ruvi, who had wanted to pretend to be dead, had no choice but to remove his disguise and regain his life force. He seemed to know that his strength was not enough to fight against the leader of the Magi in front of him, so the miniaturized Garz Ruvi could only stay in Grim's hand, enduring the crimson flames. Speak. How did you escape that explosion? Grim looked at the little fellow in his hand and asked calmly. Although his tone was calm, Garz Ruvi could feel the pressure of death from his words. Chapter 552. Being reborn from a single drop of blood was no doubt an exaggeration. Garz Ruvi's current abilities were similar to the insect Lich Bliss. Even if most of the brain was destroyed, as long as a portion of it remained, it could grow stronger. Unfortunately, Garz Ruvi's abilities were linked to the size of its brain. With a severe lack of energy and nutrition, it could barely grow from 2 or 3 fingernail-sized brain fragments into an abnormal brain capable of normal thought. With its current head-sized body, it could only control metallic substances and mechanical structures that had been contaminated by magical energy. As for the mental ability it had previously mastered, it could no longer be used due to its lack of mental strength. Now that a third of its newly grown brain had been destroyed by its old rival, Grim, it was having difficulty maintaining a complete thought process. Otherwise, it would not have played such a lowly trick as faking its death in front of a Grade 2 fire wizard. For some reason, after the brain was damaged and turned into a cerebellum, Garz Ruvi's memories and emotions had suddenly become a lot more blurry and indifferent. Even though Garz Ruvi's entire life's memories were stored in the cerebellum, memories were still memories, and the newly grown abnormal brain's instincts were clearly the dominant one. Otherwise, it would not have fawned over its old rival out of fear of death. Ignoring the other's goodwill and weakness, Grim's hands glowed red as a series of fire runes formed a series of strange spells that entered the abnormal brain's body. Grim's eyes were filled with a sharp glint as he coldly said, "Release your mental defenses." The fist-sized abnormal brain shuddered slightly, and its grayish-white brain structure could not help but tremble. It could not be clearer what the other party was trying to do. Soul brand. This was a spiritual brand that was directly etched into the soul. Once it was branded, the abnormal brain's soul would not have any secrets from the other party. As long as the other party wanted to know, they could investigate the abnormal brain's soul state at any time, as well as what it was thinking at that time. And if the abnormal brain had any unfavorable thoughts, the other party would be able to understand them clearly through the soul brand. At that time, as long as the other party sent a thought of suicide, the abnormal brain would be driven by its soul instincts to execute it perfectly. If it was still that lowly gnome, it would be powerless to resist and could only kneel and surrender. But now, in any case, it was a powerful Tier 3 monster. How could it? Before the alien brain could come up with a perfect strategy, Grim closed his palm, and his fingers, which were burned red by the flames, sank into the alien brain's body. The trembling gray matter of the brain was burnt black by the flames, emitting a pungent stench. The alien brain could feel Grim's murderous intent from the inside out. If he did not reassure the other party, he was afraid that the other party would completely destroy him in the next second. If a monster like the alien brain was allowed to escape, it would be able to turn back into the terrifying giant brain it once was in 10 days to half a month. At that time, all the metal in the goblin plane would become its body, and all the magical machines would become its slaves. Who would be able to stop it from regaining control of this world? Therefore, if Grimm did not want the demiplane that he had just gained control of to be taken away by others, he had to turn it into one of his own. Under Grimm's direct threat of death, the alien brain finally recognized its current situation. It lowered its head in dejection and dejectedly lowered its mental barrier. To be honest, as a Tier 2 fire shaman, leaving his own soul brand on a Tier 3 monster's soul was extremely difficult for Grimm and the alien brain. The alien brain was in excruciating pain, while Grimm was exhausted. After a quarter of an hour, the two finally completed the soul branding, and the weakened Tier 3 alien brain became Grimm's soul slave. Once the soul branding was complete, Grimm let out a roar and threw the alien brain away, holding its head as it slumped to the ground. It couldn't be helped. The moment the soul contract was completed, the Tier 3 alien brain's soul message flooded Grimm's weak consciousness. Beep. Detected an abnormal soul channel. Requesting host's instructions to maintain the connection? No. Turn it off first. Moments later, with the help of the AI chip, Grimm temporarily cut off the connection with the alien brain, breaking free from the sea of soul messages. Grimm stood up with Bliss's help, wiping away the black blood that flowed from his nostrils. Only then did he return to normal. As expected of a Tier 3 monster, the amount of memories and information in its mind was simply innumerable. If Grimm had absorbed all of it without any sense of urgency, his brain might have exploded. However, with the AI chip's help, Grimm no longer cared about anything related to the alien brain. He allowed the AI chip to silently sort out the information that had been transmitted to him through the soul contract. Once the AI chip was done sorting out the information, he only needed to take a brief look. With the soul contract, even if the alien brain was a rank higher than him, it would not be able to escape his control. So now, the abnormal brain had become the most trustworthy one among his many subordinates. The moment Grimm stood up, he impatiently asked the alien brain that had floated back to his side, "What do you need to recover?" While the alien brain did not have a body or any other organs, it relied on its powerful spiritual force to easily float in the air. The alien brain was now like a docile kitten, curled up on Grimm's left shoulder and using a strange telepathy to communicate with him. Huge amounts of energy and nutrient fluid. The alien brain did not have digestive organs, and could only use its gray matter to absorb liquid nutrients and magic energy bit by bit. In the past, it had the greater spatial furnace as its energy source, which allowed it to expand like a balloon. Now that the greater spatial furnace had been destroyed, it had lost a stable source of energy. It could only rely on Grimm to find a new source of energy for it. Grimm did not say anything, pointing into the air. The curled-up alien brain suddenly became spirited. At this moment there was a giant airship floating in the air above the excavation site. It was the reason why the goblins were able to transport so many excavating machines and living resources into this clear area. It was also responsible for transporting the useful waste excavated from the excavation site to distant places so that the goblins could filter and process them. Now, with Grimm's approval, this giant airship immediately became the most exquisite cake in the eyes of the alien brain. The dozen or so tentacles under the alien brain's body danced and struck itself with several spiritual forces. Camouflage, invisibility, haste. With the support of many strange spiritual forces, the fist-sized alien brain turned into a bolt of lightning and flew into the sky. It found a gap and entered the airship. The first 15 minutes were so peaceful that it almost made people fall asleep. 15 minutes later, however, the giant airship floating high up in the sky began to boil. The goblins inside fled in panic, taking all kinds of aircrafts to escape from the airship. Without Grimm's approval, the alien brain did not dare to devour the sweet flesh. Otherwise, none of the goblin technicians would be able to leave the airship alive. After the goblins were driven away, the airship's appearance actually changed slightly amidst a series of metallic creaks. The other goblins were so frightened by the scene that they did not notice it at all. Grimm, on the other hand, used the AI chip's meticulous spiritual scan to see everything. It was obvious that the alien brain was not very satisfied with its new ride after taking control of the spatial furnace in the airship. Hence, it used the overflowing mana to slightly change the structure and appearance of the airship. One had to know that the giant airship had always been the pride of the old goblin, Gaz Ruvi. The structure of the cabin and the shape of the airship were the old goblin's proudest masterpiece. It had appeared in the Goblin Empire for more than 10 years, but no goblin had been able to propose any changes. But now, with just a moment of control, the alien brain that had grown up from Gaz Ruvi's memories was able to discover so many illogical and unscientific aspects. This was enough to prove that the alien brain was much stronger than Gaz Ruvi of the past. After the changes, the new airship drew a beautiful arc in the air and began to descend rapidly into the deep pit, finally hovering 20 meters above the bottom of the pit. Steadily, propelled by magical energy, the airship no longer seemed to be drifting. Instead, it was wedged into the void like a nail, not moving an inch. Grimm's spiritual consciousness communicated with the alien brain in the invisible airship. A moment later, as a small opening opened at the bottom of the giant ship, a powerful energy storm swept out from inside, like a waterspout, sucking in the mud, debris, and all kinds of odd-shaped substances at the bottom of the pit. A thin layer of soil could be seen to the naked eye at the bottom of the deep pit. At the same time, many windows opened on the side of the airship, ejecting out the dirt that had been sucked in. The useful substances that had been filtered out were left in the belly of the airship. This efficiency was much higher than having 100 construction machines working at the same time. Grimm saw with his own eyes how efficient the alien brain was at controlling the airship, and was naturally very satisfied. After giving a few simple instructions to the alien brain, Grimm hurriedly left the excavation site and headed towards the teleportation device. Chapter 553. It was a huge manor located 30 miles west of Stirk City. Night had just fallen. The Rose Manor was brightly lit, and guests had gathered. The small square in front of the manor with a fountain in the center was filled with carriages of the nobles from the surrounding cities. One after another, noble ladies dressed in expensive furs walked out of the carriages gracefully. They were accompanied by gentlemen in luxurious robes as they walked arrogantly into the manor. At the entrance of the manor, rows of attendants in formal suits were waiting for the arrival of the guests. From time to time, they would loudly announce the distinguished titles of the guests. Lester? Vic silently stood on the balcony on the top floor of the 3-story building in the center of the manor. He held a glass of truffle wine in his hand and gently swirled it, letting the blood-red wine ripple in the glass and emit the sweet and intoxicating fragrance of blood. The truffle wine was personally made by the most famous master of the Vic family, Rito Fink. It was made with the sweetest blood from the heart of a virgin and the dew of a pine cone collected from the edge of the silent forest. Then, it was mixed with the pollen of dozens of jasmine, wild rose, and rose. The truffle wine that was blended in such a way was simply the most luxurious enjoyment of the vampire family. Therefore, its price was not affordable for ordinary vampires. Only a top-notch vampire like Lester could enjoy it as a daily pastime without batting an eyelid. Lester was tall and handsome. He looked like he was only 30 years old. He had a high nose and deep eyes. His irises were red and his pupils were golden. His dark brown, slightly curly hair was draped over his shoulders. The lines on his face were slightly firm. His perfect mustache was combed neatly, and his exposed skin was pale white, which was what all nobles dreamed of. He was wearing a well-tailored black suit. The fabric was smooth and soft, and it felt good to the touch. It was obvious that it was expensive. There was a metal chain hanging in the pocket of his suit. It seemed to be a pocket watch. Just as he expressionlessly examined the venue where the guests gathered and the dancing dancers, a clear male voice rang out behind him. Earl Leicester, all the guests have arrived. They are waiting for your arrival. The newcomer was the host of the Rose Manor, Viscount Antia, who had been sent here by the Vic family. As an ancient vampire family, the Vic family had divided the vampires in the family into 5 classes: Duke, Marquis, Earl, Viscount, and Baron. Dukes corresponded to Grade 4, Marquises corresponded to Grade 3, Earls corresponded to Grade 2, Viscounts corresponded to Grade 1, and Barons corresponded to quasi-sorcerers. As for those below the quasi-sorcerer rank, they were not even recorded in the Vic family's genealogy. Once they died, not even a name would be left behind. Due to the advanced characteristics of the vampires, their training methods were destined to be completely different from ordinary sorcerers. Chasing after the blood of the strong was their instinct, and it was also the only way for them to strengthen themselves. Sucking the blood of ordinary people could only sustain their lives, but only sucking the blood of powerful creatures could make them stronger. Therefore, they were also the group that had the closest contact with the ordinary people in the territory. In the hereditary territory of the Vic clan, every large manor would hold a grand carnival from time to time. These banquets would also invite the nobles from the surrounding cities, especially the noble ladies. This was the best opportunity for them to get close to the feudal lords. Ordinary ignorant commoners might have a great fear of vampires, thinking that they were monsters that sucked human blood and demons that spread death. However, the local nobles that belonged to the Vic clan did not think so. They lived in a territory ruled by a vampire family, so they could only dedicate their talents and abilities to these gentle and cultured foreign sorcerers. After interacting with each other for a long time, they naturally realized that vampires were not as scary as the rumors made them out to be. Vampire sorcerers were just like them. They needed to eat, drink, live, and have a large number of servants to serve them. Moreover, the greatest characteristic of vampires was their eternal youth. Even if they could not become a vampire, as long as they became a vampire's blood slave or a lowly derivative, they could slow down the aging process and make young men and women more handsome and beautiful. If vampires were demons, then vampires were also demons who spread beauty and ageless looks. For such demons, after overcoming their aversion to blood, they would become so amiable and mesmerizing. Therefore, those vain, flashy, and delusional noble ladies fell in love with such carnival banquet. At such banquets, if they were lucky enough to catch the eye of a distinguished guest of the Vic clan and take a small bite, then they would become the object of envy of all the noble ladies within 100 miles. Although from now on, she might become a blood slave who would listen to his every word, but who would care about such things? What did losing a little bit of freedom matter when they had youth and status? Therefore, when they suddenly heard that the rising star of the Vic clan, Leicester, had arrived at the Rose Manor, almost all the influential people within 100 to 300 miles impatiently rushed over. They had also brought along all the women of their respective families, whether they were mature and voluptuous ladies, graceful and delicate noble girls, or even specially trained beauties. All of them were so graceful and elegant, so charming and lovely, so charming and moving. In such an occasion, the male guests all drew closer to the preferences of the vampires. All of them wore well-ironed formal attire, looking cultured and refined, as if their clans had a deep history. A pale face, a refined temperament, a small row of sharp teeth, and an unfathomable smile, it couldn't be helped. It was said that there would be a high-ranking viscount from the vampire castle attending tonight's banquet. This, to the majority of the male guests, it was not a small encouragement and stimulation. Therefore, when Leicester calmly examined the faces in the banquet hall that were pretending to be calm, and the plump but lacking in vitality, he calmly examined the faces in the banquet hall. Not only did he not arouse any bloodthirsty lust, he also did not arouse any interest in feigning civility with them. "Is Lorcy already here?" Leicester asked coldly, stroking the 2 exquisite little mustaches on his lip. "Lady Lorcy has already arrived." She seems to like today's banquet very much. Viscount Enchia, as a low-ranking vampire of the Vic clan, could only politely remind him in this manner. With Enchia's reminder, Lester quickly found Viscount Lorcy, who was in the eye of the storm, in the banquet hall. She was a beautiful and charming woman in a pure black evening gown. She had a crystal-clear and round face like ivory, a high nose bridge, rose-colored lips, and scarlet and cute blood-red eyes. Her long dark brown hair hung down her back, reaching her waist. Under the illumination of the bright magic lamp, her snow-white chest appeared towering and majestic. As the center of attention in the banquet, more than a dozen handsome and robust young nobles surrounded her like stars surrounding the moon. They told her some jokes that made her convulse with laughter. She was laughing so hard that she was swaying back and forth. She looked like a slut. As if sensing Lester's gaze, the smiling Viscount Lorcy's blood-red eyes flickered. Separated by the crowd, separated by a distance of more than 100 meters, she clashed with him from afar. Viscount Lorcy raised the wine glass in her hand slightly, and an insolent smile appeared on her delicate face, as if she was saluting Lester from afar. However, the young nobles around her obviously did not understand her intention. They thought that the beautiful and charming Viscount Lorcy was responding to their request, so they all raised their glasses and downed the wine in one gulp. The reason why this banquet was held today was not for the vampire nobles to enjoy themselves, but to have a hint of a marriage alliance between nobles. Since Lester had advanced to level 2, his status in the clan had also risen with each passing day, and he had gradually become a person with real power. Under such circumstances, the elders of the clan could not wait to find a suitable vampire bride for him. Of course, the first choice had to be from the high-ranking female vampires. Thus, after much selection, the high-ranking Viscount Lorcy of another vampire clan located 730 miles southwest of the Vic clan's Blood Castle was chosen. Although Lorcy was currently only a level 1 elite, she was only 103 years old, and was the best candidate for her clan to advance to level 2. Thus, once the level 2 Lester and the level 1 elite Lorcy were together, the relationship between the two great vampire clans would be greatly improved. When the time came, if they could unite, the strength of the clan would definitely rise to the next level, and they would become the most famous vampire clan in the southwest of Scattered Tower Forest. Thus, today's banquet was actually a meeting arranged by the two great vampire clans, and these invited nobles were only the background of the banquet hall. To be honest, Lester was also very against today's banquet. He had always felt that this was a conspiracy of an opposing elder in the clan. He had just advanced to level 2, and it was time for him to advance by leaps and bounds. Forcing him to mate with a female vampire at this time and give birth to a pure-blooded descendant would undoubtedly greatly damage his development potential. At this moment, there were already 200 to 300 male and female guests gathered in the banquet hall. They gathered in 2s and 3s, chatting enthusiastically, and the atmosphere in the hall became more and more lively. It was also time for the master, Lester, to show himself. Lester straightened his body and tidied up his appearance. Before he left, he suddenly remembered something. "Where's the female vampire I brought back?" "She's already locked up in the blood prison under the manor. Many more people have been assigned to watch over her, so there won't be any problems." Viscount Enchia replied with a smile. Keep an eye on her for me. Tomorrow I want to uncover the mastermind behind her." Chapter 554. When Grimm stepped out of the black carriage, the banquet in the Rose Manor had already started. Since he was in a hurry, Grimm didn't have time to make any arrangements. He could only rent a carriage from a nearby city and rush to the Rose Manor. Grimm didn't wear his eye-catching sorcerer robe. He had changed into a wig, a pair of gold-rimmed spectacles, and a black double-breasted suit. Coupled with his black hair and black eyes, he looked cultured and refined, but also had a hint of nobility and arrogance that ordinary people couldn't detect. Everything happened too suddenly. Grim had already told Mary not to get too close to Lester, and that she only needed to gather some simple information about him from the outside. But obviously, Mary didn't follow his instructions. The existence of the bloodline shackles had caused Mary to be stuck at the level of a Tier 1 elite for too long. Grim's successful advancement to Tier 2 had greatly stimulated the competitive female vampire. Although the two of them were already an intimate couple in the open and in the dark, Mary's desire to be strong was still etched in her bones. Therefore, she had an extraordinary passion and motivation to hunt Lester. But unfortunately, just as Grim's hunting plan was being carried out in an orderly manner, a terrifying piece of news came back. Lester had also advanced to Tier 2 and became a terrifying vampire count. This was obviously far beyond the scope of the original hunting plan. If a Tier 2 vampire went on a killing spree, it wouldn't take more than a month for him to create a slave army purely made up of blood thralls and spawns. If a vampire family went all out, they could turn the entire central continent into a world of vampires in half a year. Unfortunately, under the supervision of the scattered Terran Wizard Association, no vampire family dared to do something so crazy. If they only produced descendants or blood thralls in their own territories, no sorcerer would interfere. However, if they extended their tentacles into someone else's territory, they would be attacked by all sorcerers. Moreover, vampires lived by sucking the blood of intelligent beings. If they turned all the people in their territory into blood thralls or derivatives, then they would fall into an awkward situation where they had nothing to eat. Under the control of these two reasons, all the vampire families living in the sorcerer world lived extremely disciplined lives and strictly controlled the number of blood thralls and spawns in their territories. Because of this, the lives of the people in their territory were almost the same as in other places. That was why there were no mass exodus due to fear of the vampire overlord. However, the vampire's dormancy did not mean that they were weak. If a comprehensive evaluation could be carried out, then vampire sorcerers would even occupy a position in the upper middle among all sorcerers of the same rank. They might not be the strongest, the fastest, or the strongest in defense, but they were the most cunning. All vampires have their own strengths and weaknesses. Its advantage was that it could run fast, transform into a bat, and was good at hiding. Its biggest advantage was that it could suck blood and recover quickly. As for its weakness, it was publicly acknowledged that its attack power was on the weak side. When facing opponents of the same rank, vampires' attack power was generally on the weak side. They could only rely on sucking blood to slowly wear down the opponent's attack power and defensive spells. Because Mary knew how difficult it was to deal with a rank 2 vampire, she was driven by her restless vampire instincts and tried to sneak up on Lester. Unsurprisingly, her movements were detected by the other party. After a 5-day chase and killing, Mary, who was affected by her bloodline instincts, could not even use her abilities and was captured alive by Lester. After checking Mary's bloodline, Lester could not help but be shocked. To put it bluntly, this descendant of a mysterious bloodline that came out of nowhere had a shocking level of development in her bloodline. To put it bluntly, this level of development had already surpassed Lester before he had leveled up. In other words, this foreign blood lady who was captured and defeated had a shockingly high success rate in leveling up to rank 2. The main reason why she had not leveled up was because of the bloodline shackles. Now that Lester had leveled up to rank 2, the upper limit of the bloodline shackles had loosened. This mysterious blood lady only needed to adjust for a period of time before she could consider leveling up. Bloodline backlash was terrifying, but as a vampire family, they had many ways to control this kind of non-pure-blooded foreign descendant. That was why Lester did not want to waste Mary, who was an excellent blood subordinate, so he did not execute her on the spot. Instead, he brought her to the Rose Manor and planned to bring her back to the ancient Blood Castle after he was done with the matters here. Time was of the essence and Grimm didn't have the time to slowly plan. Therefore, after receiving the news, he could only rush to the Rose Manor. Grimm's arrival immediately caught the attention of the servants waiting at the entrance. Truth be told, Grimm's attire was not that luxurious, and the four-wheeled carriage he rode in was inconspicuous among the many luxurious carriages. It even seemed a little shabby. However, when Grimm stood proudly in front of the manor's entrance with his hands stroking the buttons on his chest, the domineering aura that assaulted the faces of the servants immediately made them realize that an important person had arrived. Although Grimm had tried his best to restrain his mental pressure, his words, actions, and even the tips of his brows still exuded a domineering aura that could not be concealed by his attire. "Sir, may I know who you are?" The head servant who received guests at the entrance was also a blood thrall of the Vic family. His status was almost equivalent to that of a mid-level noble. In a normal sorcerer family, he would be considered a wizard apprentice. Grimm did not say much and simply gave his name. It was a lonely name without even a family title. Not only did the chief attendant in charge of reception not show any contempt, he even became more cautious and respectful. This was the sorcerer continent, and sorcerers had always been respected. Most of the sorcerers who had fought their way to the top only had a personal name and no family name. This was a stark contrast to the sorcerers raised by sorcerer families, but no one dared to look down on them. This visitor did not look like an ordinary person. He did not have a family name, so the experienced head servant immediately realized that he was a sorcerer who had hidden his identity. In the entire sorcerer continent, any manor or castle would welcome a sorcerer who came to visit. Therefore, under the loud announcement, Grimm passed through the tall and spacious door and entered the banquet hall. Since the band was playing cheerful and relaxing music, and many young noblemen and women were competing with each other on the dance floor, Grimm's arrival did not attract anyone's attention. Only the head servant waved his hand to summon a servant and whispered a few words into his ear. The servant then hurried to the main building of the manor. Ever since he came to this mysterious sorcerer world, Grimm had participated in all kinds of banquets. However, those banquets were organized by acolytes, and those were banquets organized by sorcerers. The invited guests were very simple, and their purpose was also very simple. The format of the banquet was also very simple, even a little boring. However, there were countless handsome men and beautiful women in bright clothes chasing each other and laughing to their heart's content in front of them, which had never happened before. Perhaps this was the lifestyle of those sorcerers who had given up on the path of sorcery and indulged in worldly power. Although they were both banquets, there was a clear distinction between the inner and outer area. The inner area was the banquet hall on the first floor of the three-story building in the center of the manor. Most of the people who could attend the banquet were nobles and wealthy merchants from major cities. Of course, there were also many well-chosen ladies and beautiful young girls. As for the lower and middle nobles, they could only gather around the lawn near the main building, the parlor, the botanical garden, and the boulevard. Here, they could also meet many big shots, who had sneaked out from the main hall. Therefore, wherever Grimm went, the liveliness was no less than the main hall. Although Grimm was not a body refinement sorcerer, he did not have monstrous muscles that were as hard as iron. However, he was 2 meters tall, which gave him a well-proportioned body that was almost perfect. In addition, he was wearing an exquisite tailored suit, which added a hint of gentleness and elegance to his temperament. Along the way, he did not have to deliberately seduce anyone. Countless beautiful ladies were already casting coquettish glances at him. Some bold and unrestrained women even stopped him and passionately interacted with him with lustful expressions. Although these vulgar ladies did not have the eyesight to see through Grimm's identity, they could naturally chase after the aura of a strong person. Even though Grimm had restrained his overflowing spiritual force, his surging life force was like a huge magnetic field that naturally attracted these women. Grimm's gaze swept over them and he knew what was going on. Half of the women gathered around him were blood thralls of the Vic family. They surrounded high-grade vampires every day and served them attentively, selling their youth and bodies to gain their favor. Individuals with strong vitality like Grimm were the best targets for them to hunt. Once they seduced their prey into their bed, they would secretly absorb their life force while having sex. This was the only way for them to accumulate strength and become stronger. Once they broke through the threshold and successfully became a baron, which was equivalent to a quasi-wizard, they would be able to get rid of their status as blood thralls and officially become members of the Vic family. Therefore, when they saw such a fresh and delicious prey in the banquet hall, almost half of the female blood thralls in the periphery of the Vic family were attracted to him. They gathered around Grimm to flirt and show off their flirtatious ways. Of course, this was also because Grimm had concealed his identity as a Grade 2 sorcerer. Chapter 555. To be honest, Grimm was not very good at dealing with situations like this. Perhaps it would be a good idea to slightly release the spiritual pressure of a Grade 2 magus. But if he did that, there would be a dozen or so women crying for their parents and pissing their pants. After all, apart from the female blood thralls of the Vic family, there were also a few ordinary ladies and young ladies who were out hunting. With their empty and dispirited spiritual force, they would probably collapse with just a little stimulation. Because of this, Grimm frowned slightly, and a cold and stern expression appeared on his handsome and tough face, as if he was 1,000 miles away from everyone. If the people gathered around him were the high-class nobles in the inner field, they would have tactfully left to search for easier targets. However, the group of women in front of him had obviously been bewitched by Grimm's sturdy physique and unique temperament. Even though their target was clearly angry, this did not dispel their high expectations. Instead, it made them even more fascinated. Some of the mature ladies who thought they were flirtatious began to tease Grimm with even more explicit words. Some of the bolder ones even moved closer to Grimm, teasing him with their words while trying to touch Grimm's sturdy chest. Grimm's expression turned cold, and two small flames began to burn in the depths of his black pupils. He had already made up his mind. Anyone who dared to touch him with their filthy hands would be incinerated into ashes. "What are you people doing? Back off." Just as Grimm was about to reach the end of his patience, a clear but dignified female voice sounded from not far away. The women turned around in surprise, and after seeing who it was, their expressions changed. "Lady Lorcy, greetings, Lady Lorcy." After a series of noisy but orderly bows and greetings, the girls left one after another, leaving Grimm and the newcomer at the scene. Grimm relaxed a little, and only then did he start to size up the newcomer. Fair and translucent faces, high noses, bright red lips, and scarlet eyes unique to vampires. It had to be said that there might be some kind of beauty gene hidden in the bloodline of vampires. This made all vampires, be it male or female, so handsome, beautiful, and full of charm. In addition, she was wearing a pure black evening gown, which made her look even more beautiful and graceful. A rank 1 elite female vampire. With the help of the AI chip, Grimm only needed half a finger to see through the other party's basic strength. With the difference in rank, it was impossible for the other party to hide her strength. If a vampire of this strength was within 3 meters of Grimm, and he was not prepared, there was a high chance that she could injure him. Of course, if the other party really attacked, Grimm might be injured, but the other party would definitely not be able to escape Grimm's spells. With Grimm's current attack power, if the other party did not have any powerful defensive equipment, it would not be strange for her to be killed in a single blow. That was why Grimm hesitated, but did not stop the other party from approaching him. Other women might not be able to tell that Grimm was a sorcerer, but as an elite member of her family, Lorcy could sense the surging flame energy in his body even with her eyes closed. Other women might not be able to see through Grimm's identity as a magus, but as an elite member of her family, Lorcy could sense the surging flame energy in the other party's body even with her eyes closed. If the other party was only a rank 1 magus, he should not have been able to block her spiritual senses, making her unable to see through him. However, if the other party was a rank 2 magus, it would be even more unreasonable. At the end of the day, today's gathering was just an internal marriage between two vampire families. No magi from the outside had been invited. Therefore, it was quite confusing for this powerful sorcerer to barge in so abruptly. "Your Excellency, welcome to Rose Manor." Lorcy was indeed someone who had seen the world. She immediately welcomed him with a face full of smiles. "Since you're here, why don't you come inside with me?" The young nobles behind Lorcy immediately revealed expressions of jealousy and hatred, and all of them looked at Grim with hostility. Although this was the first time Lorcy had visited Rose Manor, in the short span of 2 hours, she had successfully captured the hearts of every young noble with her irresistible charm. If it was in normal times, with their rationality and upbringing, they would not do such a thing of jealousy. But today, under Lorcy's powerful charm, a few of the young nobles could not help but become hot-headed. They all rushed in front of Grim, clamoring for a duel. Lady Lolth scolded them softly with a sullen face, but in the corner of her eyes there was a hint of arrogance. It was obvious that these bewitched young nobles had become her stepping stones to test Grim's strength. Grim was nearly 2 meters tall, and even though he was surrounded by a circle of people, he still looked outstanding. His gaze did not land on these commoners, nor did it land on the female vampire, who seemed to be angry but was actually happy. Instead, he raised his head slightly, and a pair of powerful eyes pierced through the wooden window on the 3rd floor of the small building, colliding with a pair of eyes hidden in the darkness. Their gazes met in midair, and both parties could not help but feel a chill in their hearts. It seemed that this was the main character. Since he had found the main character, Grim could not be bothered to waste his time with a bunch of useless soldiers and crab generals. He released his immense spiritual pressure and used his hands to separate the crowd in front of him. He walked confidently in front of Lorcy, who had a shocked expression on her face. "Beautiful Miss Lorcy, I'll have to trouble you to show me around this beautiful manor." As he spoke, Grim's large hands had already wrapped around Lorcy's slender waist, and he led her towards the main building not far away. A grade 2 magus. He really was a grade 2 magus. Lorcy could not help but be frightened by this frightening reality. Her limbs turned cold, and she was at a loss. Although she had always been dissolute, she had great confidence in her own strength. But now that she was facing a grade 2 magus, she could not help but tremble when the other party's gaze landed on her. She could even feel an unbearable burning sensation on the surface of her skin. Of course, this burning sensation was not caused by any actual injuries, but the effect of the laws of law contained in the other party's gaze. It was obvious that the other party had an understanding of the laws of fire, and when his gaze landed on Lorcy, he could make the laws of fire appear on the surface of her body. This was the most direct manifestation of Grim having completed the elemental conversion of his spiritual force. Faced with the grade 2 magus hand, Lorcy wanted to reject it, but under the immense pressure of the other party's spiritual force, she only felt her body go numb and warm before she fainted. When she regained consciousness, the other party had already wrapped his arms around her waist and was walking towards the small building behind her. Lorcy's face suddenly revealed a sinister smile, and she planned to use the agility unique to vampires to break free from the other party's grasp. However, the moment she activated the blood energy in her body, a warm current flowed from the other party's palm into her body. The blood-type energy that had just been condensed was smashed into pieces, and it was utterly defeated. An enormous amount of gentle fire elemental energy quickly flowed through her body, releasing countless strange runes that tightly confined Lorcy's heart core, sea of consciousness, inner palace, and other energy nodes. As a result, Lorcy, who had been stubborn and unyielding, immediately became as gentle as water, half of her body leaning on Grim. Her expression was languid, and her beautiful eyes were tightly shut, as if she did not even have the strength to move a finger. At this moment, if not for the support of the other party's strange energy, Lorcy, whose blood energy had been severed into several pieces, would have fallen into his embrace. It was only when Grimm entered the main building with Lorcy in his arms that the group of nobles that had surrounded him broke free from the most terrifying mental nightmare. A few of the more mentally strong ones were sweating profusely, their legs trembling, and looked as if they were about to collapse. As for those who were mentally weak, as soon as they broke free from the mental nightmare, they ran around in fear, waving their hands and screaming. Lester witnessed everything from the third floor of the main building. Naturally, he also felt how powerful and terrifying the other party's mental strength was. Therefore, when Grimm entered the main building, he immediately lowered his head and whispered a few words, quickly assigning tasks to the outer members of his family. Therefore, when Grimm carried Lorcy up the stairs to the third floor, those who had lost their minds had already been taken away. The banquet below had also returned to normal. Those who were qualified to attend the banquet were naturally people who knew what was going on. When the banquet host did not say anything, they would continue to laugh and laugh as if nothing had happened. However, when they were chatting or dancing to their heart's content, they would unconsciously shift their gaze to the three-story building. Maybe, something big that they did not know was slowly brewing there. When Grimm was led into the guest hall on the third floor by a well-mannered young nobleman, the Tier 2 vampire Count Lester Vick was already waiting for him. "Welcome. Welcome to my humble family's Rose Manor. Welcome. Welcome to my humble family's Rose Manor. May I have the honor of knowing your name?" Lester's face was full of smiles, and his eyes were filled with enthusiasm. He ignored the female vampire who was clinging to Grimm's body. At this moment, only Lester, Grimm, and Lorcy were left in the guest hall. The vampire who led the way had already closed the door and left. Grimm. Chapter 556. Grimm? As Lester sat down with Grimm, he quickly searched for this name in his mind. With the powerful spiritual force of a magus, almost all of them had a photographic memory. This was especially true for a person with a unique appearance like Grimm. If they had met in the past, it would be impossible for them to forget him. However, no matter how hard he tried, he could not recall anything. This meant that this was the first time they had met. The smile on Lester's face froze for a moment before returning to normal. "Sir Grimm, may I know why you have come to our family's Rose Manor?" Facing a magus of the same rank, even with Lester's arrogance, he did not dare to be rude. A Tier 2 sorcerer was an influential figure in any family. Even with the Vick family's background and strength, they did not dare to provoke a Tier 2 magus. "I believe you already know why I am here, sir." Grimm smiled and loosened his grip on Loltha's waist. "Haven't you been waiting for me to come?" As soon as Grimm's hand left Lorcy's body, the energy shackles in her body dissipated. However, due to Grimm's imposing manner, Lorcy did not dare to move even a little, even though she was free. She could feel that this mysterious Tier 2 magus was not a kind guest, and there seemed to be some kind of conflict between him and Lester. If she did not know what was good for her and moved, it was very likely that she would start a fight between the two magi. Although she thought highly of herself, if she was caught between two terrifying Tier 2 magi, it would be difficult for her to escape if they really started a fight. Lester's expression froze, and he could not help but feel a bad premonition in his heart. "You mean, that female vampire?" Although he had expected this, when he saw Grimm slightly nod his head, he could not help but become serious. That female vampire had appeared out of nowhere, and after being captured, she did not say a word, not even telling him her name. Thus, Lester had used his family's channels to investigate her identity. But what he didn't expect was that before he could find out the identity of the other party, the mastermind behind the other party had already taken the initiative to reveal himself. "Ross, I have something to discuss with this wizard Grimm. You can leave for now." Lester squinted his eyes and said in a low voice. The female vampire's body trembled, and her scarlet eyes shifted to Grim, not daring to move. Sir Lester is right. We do have something to discuss. Beauty, you should leave first. Grim suddenly smiled and patted the female vampire's buttock. Lorcy immediately heaved a sigh of relief. She rolled her eyes at Grim and left the living room, swaying her hip. Seeing that Lorcy had left, Lester's stern gaze finally loosened a little. At least he wasn't despicable enough to kidnap Lorcy, and this won Lester's good impression of him. Although the other party wouldn't be able to threaten him in the slightest by kidnapping Lorcy, the fact that the other party was willing to give up this advantage of his own accord still caused the tense atmosphere to relax a little. Sir Grim, you should know. Spying on someone else's bloodline is a big taboo. Although his expression was a little better, Lester's tone was still the same. I don't care what method you use to steal my bloodline. I have to take it back now. That female vampire had his bloodline. If he allowed her to grow on her own, it was almost certain that she would suffer a bloodline backlash. So Lester suppressed the anger in his heart and coldly rejected Grim's unreasonable request. Sir Lester, don't forget what you did to the Cerubo family 90 years ago. Grim immediately replied in an unfriendly tone. 90 years ago? The Cerubo family? Lester's eyes lit up as he received this information. He immediately understood the reason behind the whole thing. 90 years ago, he was still a Grade 1 vampire who had just advanced to the next rank not long ago. In order to purify his bloodline, he had no choice but to find a secret place outside of his family to quietly study the vampire bloodline. In the Cerubo family's territory, he had hidden his identity and bought an old castle, secretly doing some secret research that he didn't want his family to know about. Unfortunately, just as he had some progress in his research, he was stopped by the other party because he had kidnapped a Cerubo family's apprentice to conduct experiments. Both sides fought a bloody battle. Lester escaped successfully, but the laboratory he had left under the castle was destroyed in an instant. He originally thought that the blood samples he had left there had been destroyed, but now it seemed that they had fallen into the hands of the Cerubo family. This way, the source of the female vampire's blood was clear. The Cerubo family was quite resourceful. They had only used part of their own blood source to successfully create a female vampire, and they had even trained her to such an outstanding level. This made Lester exclaim in admiration. But this way, both sides became awkward. Lester had casually entered the Cerubo family's territory to set up a laboratory, and he had even kidnapped the Cerubo family's apprentice as a test subject. If this news spread to the Scattered Tower Forest Sorcerer Association, he would probably be criticized. However, with his current status as a rank 2 vampire wizard, even if the old men of the Scattered Tower Forest wanted to interfere, they would only ask for compensation. He could still afford to make such a mistake. Of course, if he was not a rank 2 vampire, but a rank 1 vampire, then it would not be a mistake, but a crime. On the contrary, the Cerubo family had used his blood source to create a female vampire. This would not be able to escape the crime of spying on the Vic family's bloodline secrets. So if both sides were to argue, they would be evenly matched, and neither side would be able to suppress the other. However, now that the female vampire was in Lester's hands, overall, he had an obvious advantage. After explaining the situation in a few words, both sides could not help but frown. Grim was thinking about the probability of Lester giving up on Mary, while Lester was thinking about the reason why Lester wanted the female vampire. The female vampire's potential was indeed outstanding, and she had the possibility of advancing to rank 2. But it was only a possibility. Would the other party risk the wrath of a Tier 2 vampire just because of this possibility? As if sensing Lester's doubts, Grim finally revealed the truth. Sir Lester, to tell you the truth, the Mary you've detained is my lover. I will not give her up for any benefits. After listening to Grimm's righteous confession, Lester finally realized the seriousness of the situation. Just like how Lester would not give up on Mary, he also had a reason not to let Mary go. Thus, there seemed to be no room for negotiation between the two of them, as if sensing the determination in each other's eyes, Lester and Grimm's expressions became more and more serious. Unknowingly, a cold and dignified killing intent began to emerge. The atmosphere in the hall froze for only half a second. It was unknown which of the two had the murderous intent, but at the same time, the two rank 2 sorcerers erupted. The living room was not big. Both of them were only 5 to 6 meters away from each other, and there was a sturdy oak table between them. However, in the blink of an eye, the oak table shattered into pieces and flew towards Grimm's head. Lester's ghost-like figure instantly closed in on Grimm. Lester waved his hands quickly, and his sharp nails were like sharp blades, piercing into Grimm's body with a thick bloody aura. As soon as the attack was formed, and before he could see its effect, Lester felt a surging stream of flames rushing towards him, and his instincts changed. His nails pierced half an inch into Grimm's body. If he had a tenth of his fingers, he was confident that he could pierce a few holes in Grimm's body. However, the pressing sense of danger made him give up on this opportunity, and he flashed away from Grimm's side. In the next second, a raging firestorm swept out from Grimm's body, and in an instant, the entire living room was engulfed in a sea of fire. BZZT BZZT BZZT. As the terrifying flames surged and churned, Grimm's black suit was torn apart, and 7 or 8 bone-deep blood gushed out of his wounds. Before the blood could even reach the ground, it was instantly vaporized by the high temperature. At the same time, the Destruction Flame Wizard's staff appeared in Grimm's left hand. With a slight shake, an even larger and more terrifying fire barrier shot out, enveloping the entire 3-story building in an instant. The terrifying flames and terrifyingly high temperature engulfed the entire banquet hall at the same time. The ordinary people who were not protected by any spells did not even have the chance to make a sound before they were instantly turned into ashes. As for the members of the Vic family, they all emitted a thick bloody mist from their bodies, protecting themselves as they tried their best to escape from the fire barrier. As for the vampires and blood thralls below the rank of Viscount, they did not even have time to escape from the fire barrier before their blood energy was depleted and they were burned to ashes. In the banquet hall there were originally 300 to 400 people who were laughing and chatting, but in an instant, only 3 to 4 people managed to struggle out of the Rose Manor. As for the others, they were all turned into a pile of dust in the terrifying sea of fire. Chapter 557. Beep. Damage has been detected on the body's surface. Damage has reached 43%. Urgent treatment is recommended. Beep. Traces of blood elemental energy detected on the wound. Energy needs to be neutralized before emergency treatment. Beep. Blood loss continues. Blood loss has reached 1%. Energy loss has reached 2%. Energy loss has reached 2%. Beep. Host's flame barrier has been activated. High temperature domain has been activated. Burning domain is being formed. Beep. Host's energy strength is increasing. Force field has been distorted. Calculating the distortion rate, a series of AI chip prompts flashed through Grimm's mind. He only skimmed through most of the data and did not do much to intervene. At the same time, he calmly waited for the AI chip's calculation of the distortion in the force field around him. For Tier 2 sorcerers like them, the energy attacks they could inflict were between 200 to 300 degrees. For a rank 1 magus, this was a terrifying height that they would never be able to reach. Due to the elemental energy in their bodies being too strong, the combination of their spiritual force and magic power caused the force field around them to constantly distort. In such an environment, any magus eyes or spiritual force would experience a slight deviation. The degree of deviation would also depend on the strength of the two magi. If a magus trusted his eyes too much and attacked according to what he saw, he would be shocked to find that his attacks would never match up with what he expected. The target he wanted to attack would never be in the position he had set for himself. This was the result of the distortion in the force field. Under normal circumstances, the distortion in the force field would not be too excessive and would not affect a battle between high-ranked magi. However, when two evenly matched magi were fighting, this small change could be exploited by one side and become the key to turning the situation around. At the start of the battle, before Grimm could unleash his strength, Lester had already used his agility to launch a sneak attack. Even though this amount of damage wasn't considered serious for a Grade 2 fire wizard, it wasn't a good sign that he had lost 72% of his blood and 20% to 15% of his energy at the beginning of the battle. Grimm stood in the air, his body completely enveloped by the elemental flames that were spewing out from his body. The violent and ferocious elemental flames were boiling. Grimm's body had turned almost white, almost transparent. He had completely turned into a terrifying flaming man. The small wounds on the surface of his body quickly healed under the repair of the flame energy, but the blood he lost was difficult to recover in a short period of time. Opposite of Grimm, a pair of gray, leathery bat wings extended from Lester's back. There were sharp spikes at the ends of the wings. Relying on this pair of bat wings, Lester floated above the sea of fire. It stuck out its long, scarlet tongue and licked the boiling blood that remained between its fingers. That's right, as Grimm's flame energy erupted, the blood that had been separated from his body became scalding hot and the temperature increased. When he licked it with his tongue, he felt as if he was licking boiling lava. Even though the temperature of the blood had already reached 700 degrees, Lester still squinted his eyes and licked it without hesitation. When the crimson blood was sucked into his body, Lester even raised his head and moaned in happiness and pain. Beep. Abnormal loss of energy detected. Initial estimation, 1%. 16%. The prompt from the AI chip in Grimm's mind caused his expression to change. The vampire in front of him could actually absorb the elemental energy in his body through the blood that had been separated from his body. This, although it was unimaginable, it was not surprising when one considered the powerful bloodline of the vampires. Tong tong tong, following a series of explosions, a large amount of flame energy gathered in front of Grimm, condensing into a flaming shield with countless flaming runes. The solidified flames intertwined with the swirling flames, quickly revolving around Grimm's body. At the same time, two more massive and sturdy lava shields were rapidly forming around the fire shield. With lava as the base, flames as the binder, and flame runes swirling on both sides of the shield, the lava flowing on both sides of the shield, and the flames lingering around it gave off a solemn and heavy feeling. As the defensive fire spells took shape, Grimm was protected by layers and layers of dense shields. It was no longer easy for Lester to get close to him. Looking at Grimm, who had completed his personal shield not far away, even with Lester's arrogance, he could not help but feel his scalp go numb. Any of the shields around Grimm's body would not be able to withstand a single swipe from Lester's sharp claws. But there were so many of them. If Lester's attack was blocked by these shields, it would give the fire wizard enough time to chant incantations and cast spells. Even with Lester's strength, it would be difficult for him to withstand a violent attack from a rank 2 fire wizard if he was entangled by the shield. Even among the talented sorcerers, elemental sorcerers had always been known for their strong offense but weak defense. If they were allowed to unleash their full power, no sorcerer of the same rank could withstand their unbridled firepower. Elemental sorcerers were indeed strong in offense but weak in defense. However, their weakness was relative. For someone like Lester, who was known for his speed and agility but weak in offense, it would be difficult for him to break Grimm's shields with his ghost-like movements and get close to Grimm. It would be much better if Lester was a physique refinery sorcerer with high elemental resistance. Since both sides had shed all pretense of cordiality, there was nothing else to worry about. Grim, who was hovering in mid-air, instantly turned into a terrifying human-shaped, self-propelled cannon. Streaks of powerful fire spells swept towards Lester like a storm. Meanwhile, Lester flapped his huge bat wings and moved nimbly between the fire waves. From time to time, he would get close to Grim's side and smash or scratch the fire shield around his body. With Lester's high agility and nimbleness, even if Grim tried his best to lock on to his position, his fire spells would still miss most of the time. Even if Lester managed to hit his target, he would use a special method to dodge away from the center of the explosion and only have to endure the shockwaves from the spells. However, with the recoil of the fire shield and the burning effect of the fire barrier, Lester could not attack without taking any damage. Every second that he swam around Grim's body, he had to endure the burning of the omnipresent flames. However, with the protection of the blood mist, he could easily endure the intense fire damage. If Grim, who was hovering in midair, was a rampaging machine gun, then Lester would be a gray bat that wandered around the edge of the cannon's muzzle. He made use of the gaps between Grim's attacks and tried his best to break the dense fire shield around Grim's body. However, at the same time, he had to be extra careful to avoid being burned by the violent flames if he could not dodge in time. A lava ball of 220 degrees Celsius could not kill him. However, once his body was frozen by the lava ball, it would not be easy for him to escape the next baptism of flames. Lester originally wanted to use his swift movements to attract Grim's full firepower and wait for Grim to consume more than half of his energy before launching a counterattack. However, when the two of them fought above the Rose Manor and turned the entire manor into a sea of fire, Lester was surprised to find that Grim's firepower was still as fierce as before. There was no sign of him running out of energy. It was as if Grim was not worried about running out of energy at all. Damn it, damn it, damn it. This was a wizard who had completed elemental conversion of both his body and spirit. He must have condensed the corresponding elemental core in his body. Facing an elemental wizard who had a small energy pool, normal tactics would be useless. Unless Lester could increase the intensity of the battle by 2 levels, it would be a joke to think of exhausting Grim's elemental energy. While Lester was worrying about Grim, Grim was also frowning and thinking hard. Lester could not attack Grim through the dense elemental shields, and Grim's violent fire spells could not catch up with Grim's swift and agile figure. After half an hour, Grim's fire spells had completely plowed the ground under his feet, but the damage he had done to the vampire could be counted on one hand. Trying to make the other party yield with just this amount of damage was simply a fantasy. As a Tier 2 wizard, when Grim fought with all his might, even though he had the upper hand 99% of the time, the advantage he had was negligible. He had to use all his strength to chase after Grim's figure. If he let his guard down, he might be ambushed by Grim. Every time this happened, it meant that he would lose 2 or 3 of his fire shields. In comparison, although the lava shield's defense was better, it was not as flexible as the fire shield in terms of movement and blocking. Once the fire shields were depleted, the 2 lava shields would not be able to stop Grim's sneak attack. The 2 Tier 2 wizards were locked in a stalemate in midair. The violent and ferocious fire spells had changed the terrain beneath them. The once beautiful and tranquil Rose Manor was now in ruins. All the buildings that stood on the ground collapsed in the fireballs and sea of fire that fell from the sky. All the plants and flower beds were incinerated by the monstrous flames, leaving black marks on the ground. Chapter 558. The Rose Manor was one of the Vic family's properties, and its defensive capabilities could not compare to the ancient Blood Castle. When the 2 Tier 2 sorcerers unscrupulously swept through the manor, all the buildings here suffered devastating damage and were trampled under their feet. When the buildings and wooden houses on the surface collapsed and were destroyed in the raging inferno, some of the hidden underground areas of the manor were inevitably affected. The Blood Prison, This was one of the most common places for vampire families. The purpose of its existence was to imprison low-ranked vampires who had made mistakes. As vampires, they naturally knew the strengths and weaknesses of other vampires. Hence, the facilities here were more targeted, and at the same time, more bloody and cruel. Vampires used blood as a carrier and energy source. Once they lost more than half of their blood, their strength would be greatly reduced. Apart from being used to imprison vampires, the blood prison was also a terrifying torture chamber. Mary, who had been captured, was now suspended above a huge wooden barrel. 7 or 8 silver chains as thick as a thumb pierced through her shoulder blades, collarbone, ribs, wrists, and ankles, firmly fixing her in midair. As magical silver was indescribably destructive to a vampire's body, the wounds inflicted by the silver chains would never heal by themselves. The coarse chains rubbed against Mary's wounds until they were a bloody mess. Scarlet blood continuously flowed from her wounds, dripping into the large barrel beneath her. The barrel was so large that it could easily fit 3 Marys. However, as the blood continued to drip down, it actually seemed like it was about to fill up. The 2 vampire barons in the blood prison were in charge of Mary's imprisonment. As low-ranked vampires, they were overjoyed to see a high-ranked viscount suffer in front of them. They did not hesitate to express their joy through words and actions. As Mary was a spoil of war personally delivered by the Tier 2 Duke, they did not dare to secretly take a sip of the blood even though the barrel was about to overflow. On the other hand, Mary was wearing red armor, red boots, and long red hair. Even though she had been tortured by the silver chains to the point that she did not look like a human, her impressive figure and beautiful face were still very shocking from afar. No matter how talented she was, a foreign vampire who could threaten the Count had to be eliminated as soon as possible. Since Mary had fallen into Sir Leicester's hands, it was almost impossible for her to leave the blood prison alive. Therefore, the 2 male baron vampires, who were only at the level of a prospective sorcerer, walked around Mary all day long, cursing her with the most vicious language. From time to time, they would also look at Mary's body with greedy and passionate eyes. And their greatest pleasure was to pull those silver chains from time to time, letting them rub against Mary's flesh, grinding the surrounding bones and flesh into a bloody mess, making the blood flow more cheerfully. However, it was a pity that no matter how much they tortured her for fun, Mary clenched her teeth and refused to make a sound. For the first 2 days, Mary would glare at them angrily with her scarlet eyes. But these few days, as the blood in her body almost dried up, her body and strength had weakened to the point that she didn't even have the strength to open her eyes. But today, a series of horrifying shockwaves suddenly came from the manor above the blood prison. The entire Rose Manor seemed to have been thrown into a meat grinder. The tremors caused the buildings to collapse and the ground to crack. The blood prison, which was located underground, was unavoidably affected. Rays of witchcraft light shone on the radiant green stone walls that were covered in moss and dark spots, forming a tight protective force field that blocked the witchcraft attacks that came from the sky. If it wasn't for the protection of the witchcraft of the blood prison, the 2 baron vampires hiding inside would not have been able to withstand the burning of Grimm's flame barrier. They would have long been burned to ashes. The 2 vampires guarding Mary didn't know what was going on, so they quickly took out their communication wands and tried to contact their companions outside. Unfortunately, they tried many times, but there was no response. Even Viscount Enchia, who was in charge of the entire Rose Manor, was out of the question. Of course, they didn't even dare to think about opening the blood prison's protection to take a look. Even a high-level facility like the blood prison had been ravaged by the mysterious power to such an extent. One could easily imagine what would happen to the buildings outside. For the sake of their own lives, it was better to hide here and wait until it was safe outside before going out. However, just when the 2 vampire barons were at a loss of what to do, Mary, who was suspended in the air, suddenly opened her blood-red eyes. Her weak eyes faintly revealed a fierce and cold murderous intent. Just now, when the strong shock waves swept through the blood prison, although most of the shock waves were absorbed and blocked by the blood prison's protection, the power that penetrated through was not to be underestimated. At least, the ends of the silver chains that fixed her to the surrounding walls had loosened. At this moment, Mary was extremely weak. Her strength was even weaker than that of a 4 or 5-year-old child. But a ruthless urge from the bottom of her heart urged her. This might be her only chance to escape. The loosening of the silver chains allowed her body, which had been stretched into a sprawl, to have some space to move around. Mary endured the pain from the friction of the silver chains in her body and pulled her left hand back. Then, she opened her mouth and used her sharp teeth to bite off half of her wrist. Only then did her left hand break free from the silver chains. After biting her left hand, she bit her right hand. When her hands broke free, she rested for a while. Originally, most of her hands had been cut off. Only a small part of her skin and bones were left. Without the restraints of the silver chains and the continuous loss of blood, the powerful recovery ability of the vampire race was undoubtedly displayed. Then, she used her hands to break her shoulder blade and collarbone, and slowly pulled out the silver chains from her body. This process was undoubtedly comparable to the most terrifying, bloody, and cruel torture in the world. But Mary gritted her teeth and endured it, not even making a sound, until the last silver chain was slowly pulled out from her body. The moment the chains left her body, Mary's blood energy that had been cut off was once again integrated and flowed throughout her body. She could not help but let out a soft hum of happiness from the comfortable feeling. Hearing the sound, the 2 vampire barons suddenly turned their heads and saw a free female vampire who had broken free from the silver chains. "Quick! Hurry up! She has just broken free and has not recovered her strength. We still have a chance." One of the older vampire could not help but whisper. 2 swift figures immediately pounced on Mary. Mary raised her pretty face and sneered. Her whole body suddenly sank, and she actually plunged into the bucket of blood below her. Amid the ripples of blood, Mary instantly submerged into the blood water. In the next second, an unstoppable and powerful blood energy exploded in the blood prison. The 2 vampires who were halfway to pounce were caught off guard and were immediately splashed by the blood water. If it was any other time in the past, the blood water that contained the target's life energy would be the most nourishing and fastest healing medicine for the vampires. But today, the blood water suddenly seemed to have a life of its own. Not only could they not absorb it, but it corroded their bodies and made them feel dull pain. The 2 low-level vampires stopped in their tracks in shock and looked down at their bodies. They were horrified to find that the blood water was alive. The blood that splashed on their bodies seemed to have its own intelligence. It gathered into a ball of blood and kept twisting and changing shape. Countless thin thorns of different lengths emerged from the ball of blood and fiercely pierced the surface of the vampire's skin. They were like small blood-type monsters that continuously created wounds for the vampires. Some even drilled into their skin and stirred up trouble inside their bodies, destroying everything that could be destroyed. As the 2 vampire barons wailed in pain, the huge vats of blood exploded with a bang. In the blood mist that filled the sky, a tall figure with huge bat wings on her back was faintly discernible. She roared at the sky. After Mary vented the anger in her body with a series of crazy roars, she retracted her bat wings, and the blood mist in the blood prison returned to her body like tired birds returning to the forest. At this moment, not only did she absorb all the blood in the bucket of blood back into her body, but even the blood of the 2 vampire barons gushed out like a broken dam and was directly absorbed by her. A moment later, the 2 withered corpses that had their blood drained fell to the ground. Their skin was cracked and wrinkled like the bark of a 1,000-year-old tree. There was not a single drop of water in them. Their life energy flowed into Mary's body along with the last drop of blood. After dealing with these 2 small fries, Mary flapped her bat wings and her whole body turned into a meteor wrapped in blood mist. She instantly broke through the ceiling of the blood prison and slowly rose into the sky while flapping her bat wings in the sea of fire. Mary's sudden appearance immediately attracted the attention of the two Tier 2 wizards who were fighting. Vampire Earl Lester and Fire Shaman Grimm had completely different expressions when they saw Mary. One was shocked, while the other was delighted. Count Lester's expression changed drastically. With a sway of his body, he pounced towards Mary. While pouncing towards her, he shouted loudly, "Come here!" As the blood-red rune appeared on Lester's forehead, Mary's consciousness became dizzy. Her whole body unconsciously flapped her wings and flew towards Lester. However, at this moment, a huge ring of flames exploded between Mary and Lester. Grimm, who had seized the opportunity, blocked Mary with a precise flame jump and put Lester behind him. Mary clenched her teeth and used all her strength to not attack Grimm. In her vampire bloodline that flowed through her body, a mysterious force called out to her, tempting her. It wanted her to submit to the great Master Lester and use all her body, mind, and strength to serve him. However, this instinct of her bloodline was in serious conflict with her main body's consciousness. She could only moan and fall into Grimm's arms. Although Mary had recovered most of her strength by absorbing blood, there were still traces of torture on her body. Grimm scanned her with his spiritual force and roughly saw her condition. His heart was filled with endless pity. "Very good. You are very good." Grimm looked at Lester with a cold gaze. "Today's matter has come to an end. We will talk about the rest later." Lester took a step forward and replied in the same cold tone, "You think you can escape punishment just because you saved her? Don't underestimate the Vick family's strength. Next time, you might have to kneel and beg me to forgive you for today's crime." Chapter 559. The Blazing Flame Monarch. The return of Grimm and Mary did not attract anyone's attention. Most of the wizards of the Wizard's Pagoda did not even know when the two of them had left. Some of the less informed ones still stubbornly believed that Grimm had locked himself in the upper levels of the Wizard's Pagoda to slowly stabilize his spiritual force after reaching level 2. What they did not know was that the wizards of Grimm's faction had already completed a dimensional expedition. The leader of the faction, Grimm, had even fought a vampire wizard of the same level. Of course, the aftermath of the battle had not disappeared. To put it bluntly, the aftermath of the battle between two Grade 2 wizards destroying the Rose Manor had only just begun, and the severe consequences would only get worse in the next few months. The Rose Manor was the private property of the Vick family, and it had already been razed to the ground. The number of nobles and servants who had died numbered 400 to 500. Although wizards usually did not care about the lives of these worldly agents, it was a different story when it concerned the reputation and glory of the family. Regardless of whether the Vick family took revenge in private or caused a ruckus in the scattered wizard association of the Tower Forest, Grimm would not be at peace. He would likely be condemned and suppressed by various factions. If he did not handle this properly, Grimm's faction that had just formed might come to a premature end. Even he himself might not be able to establish a foothold in the scattered Tower Forest region. Of course, how this matter would develop would depend on the attitude of the Cerubo family. If the Cerubo family was willing to step forward and take responsibility for this matter, the Vick family would not be too ruthless out of respect for the Grade 6 Great Wizard. When the time came, Grimm would be able to get through this crisis safely, be it compensation of magical crystals or resources. However, considering Grimm's current relationship with the Cerubo family, it was almost impossible for the Cerubo family to step forward. Grimm even had to be careful that the Cerubo family would use this matter to kick him while he was down. Hence, after bringing Mary back to the Blazing Flame Monarch, the first thing Grimm considered was how to strengthen his faction. Third level of the Blazing Flame Monarch. After many years of operation, the magic facilities here were completely complete. A sealing room, a library, a golem factory, an alchemy laboratory, a scroll production room. As long as it was a magic facility that wizards could use, it had everything here. Originally, these magic facilities were open to the public, and some of them had even been handed over to the magi stationed in the tower and the resident magi to manage and use them. However, in the past half a month, the Blazing Flame Monarch's butler, Garg, had suddenly taken back his authority to manage the sealing room and began to reject all non-core magi's requests. Fortunately, the use of the sealing room was very limited. Wizards might not even use it once in 8 to 10 years. Therefore, this small inconvenience did not bring too much trouble to the resident wizard. However, there were still some magi who could guess that the Blazing Flame Monarch's management was in a hurry to retract the authority to manage the sealed room. It was very likely that they wanted to seal and imprison some sensitive or powerful otherworld beings, or else they wouldn't have been in such a rush. The upper echelons of the Blazing Flame Monarch were indifferent to these rumors and did not pay any attention to them. Strictly speaking, there were only 6 core magi who knew what kind of otherworld creature was imprisoned in the 3rd level of the Blazing Flame Monarch's sealed room. 2 of them were in the plane of the goblins, while the other 2 were in the far north. Within the Blazing Flame Monarch, only Grimm and Gargamel knew the inside story. Even the forest demon Ava, without Grimm's approval, Gargamel didn't dare to tell her about it. After returning from the Rose Manor, Grimm brought Mary back to the Blazing Flame Monarch's first stop, which was the sealing room in the 3rd level of the Wizard's Pagoda. After going through a series of tightly guarded secret doors and layers of witchcraft verification, Grimm finally used his authority as the Tower Master to open the door of the sealed room. He then brought Mary into this mysterious place. The sealing room sounded like a mysterious place, but in essence, it was just an ordinary room covered in graphite lines and inscribed with countless protective runes. It was protected by many mysterious barriers. There were many different layers of seals in the sealing room, and their prices varied according to the level of the seals. Through the ingenious design of magical geometry, the sealing room could effectively block the probing of any prophecy-type wizard spells. Anyone who wanted to use wizard spells or magical items to probe the room would have to obtain permission from the owner of the Wizard's Pagoda. Otherwise, they would have to deal with the countless anti-detection spell formations. Furthermore, there was a perfect sealing binding spell formation within the sealing room that could borrow the power of the Wizard's Pagoda to seal terrifying magical beasts or powerful otherworld creatures that could not be dealt with at the moment. Thus, the sealing room became Grimm's temporary prison for the Level 3 Lightning Dragon arms and Level 2 Draconian Zacha. When Grimm and Mary stepped into the mysterious sealing room, they saw 2 pillars of light of different colors, one large and one small. The larger pillar of light sealed a terrifying lightning dragon that was 17 meters long, its body covered in dense azure scales. Rune chains that seemed to have substance appeared out of thin air, wrapping around the lightning dragon's massive body. Under the combined suppression of the runic chains and plane of existence, the thunder dragon, which had the strength of a Tier 3 monster, could not budge an inch. It could only close its eyes and use its powerful willpower to resist the plane of existence's laws. Beneath its body, a glowing wizard dagger was stuck between its chest and abdomen. Viscous dragon blood infused with the law of lightning flowed down the dagger, slowly dripping into a clay jar beneath the lightning dragon's body. Outside the pillar of light, similar clay jars were piled up, reaching a height of over 2 meters. There were 7 or 8 jars filled with dragon blood that had their openings sealed. At the other end of the sealing room, within a smaller pillar of light, the Level 2 Draconian Zacha, who was bound by rune chains and unable to move, silently looked at Grimm with a complicated expression. Grimm would never give anyone the authority to enter and exit such an important place. Even the Flame Monarch's butler, Gargamel, would not be able to enter and leave as he pleased. Hence, in order to take care of the lightning dragon, Grimm had transferred the engineering support magic puppet from his laboratory here to be in charge of producing dragon blood. Without Grimm's guidance, Mary's scarlet eyes stared unblinkingly at the lightning dragon arms. No. To be more precise, she was staring at the dragon blood flowing happily beneath the lightning dragon's body. Go, drink to your heart's content. I'm sure this feast of dragon blood will make up for the deficit you've had for the past few days. With Grimm's permission, Mary instantly transformed into a hungry ghost that had been thirsty for 1,000 years. She flashed into the pillar of light and lay on the lightning dragon's wound, gulping down the viscous dragon blood in large mouthfuls. Her unbridled actions had infuriated the thunder dragon, arms. However, as soon as the lightning energy within its body began to gather, the runic chains within the pillar of light blossomed with countless mysterious runes. The power of thunder and lightning condensed within Lei Long's body was like a broken wine bottle, instantly leaking out cleanly. All the lightning energy was channeled into the mysterious space along the rune chains. With the lightning energy in its body gone, the lightning dragon that was about to raise its head and roar suddenly felt its limbs go limp. It could only lie on the ground in grief and indignation, unable to struggle at all. However, even if it could not retaliate openly, it still had some tricks up its sleeves. The viscous purple dragon blood had just been sucked into Mary's body. Before she could digest and absorb the surging life force within, the dragon blood exploded in her stomach. Although the lightning energy in the dragon's blood had left its body, it still maintained a faint connection with the rank 3 thunder dragon. Under Lei Long's command, the power of thunder and lightning within the dragon blood suddenly exploded, instantly blasting Mary's internal organs to pieces, turning her into a bloody mess. Many of her internal organs had turned into a bloody mess that was hard to identify. This kind of terrifying injury would be fatal to anyone who suffered it. However, to a vampire, it was only a moderate injury. As the powerful life energy within the dragon blood was absorbed into his body, his 5 viscera and 6 bowels, which had been smashed like a pile of mud, began to regrow under the drive of the strange laws. As the powerful life force continued to pour into her body, the newly regrown organs became even stronger and more resilient than before. However, not long after, following a series of lightning explosions, the newly regrown organs were once again destroyed by the lightning energy. However, this time, only a portion of them were destroyed. Some of the flesh and blood still remained. As such, as the dragon blood continued to pour into her body, Mary's body would occasionally be struck by lightning and thunder, each time causing her considerable damage. However, Mary, who had already made up her mind to eat her fill, was unmoved. She gritted her teeth and lay on the wound, devouring the dragon blood in large mouthfuls. As for the internal organs in her body, they were destroyed as soon as they were regenerated, only to be destroyed again. It was as if she had fallen into an endless cycle. The lightning energy in the dragon blood, which Mary could not endure, was released. She used this process of destruction and reconstruction to slowly convert the dragon blood's life force into her own bloodline energy. She had suffered unprecedented cruel torture in the Rose Manor. Although she had absorbed more than half of the origin blood, she had still lost a lot of power. Now, with the powerful Tier 3 Thunder Dragon blood, Mary was like a mouse that had fallen into a rice jar. The only thing she could do was eat, eat, eat. She ate until her stomach was full, until the power of the bloodline in her body was full, until the blood energy almost made her body explode. Only then did Mary let go of her mouth with difficulty and stopped swallowing like her life depended on it. Chapter 560. Seeing Grimm pick up Mary and turn around to leave, the rank 3 Thunder Dragon arms, who had just lost a lot of blood, could no longer hold it in. "What do you want, human magus?" Arms roared weakly. Ever since this despicable human magus had captured the Thunder Dragon in the Goblin Plain, he'd used a special goblin teleportation device to transfer it to a higher plane. Although the rank 3 Thunder Dragon had never been to this plane, Its keen sense of smell and plain perception allowed it to detect the strong aura of a magus in the laws of this plane. Chaotic, evil, strange, and powerful, although magi liked to wear the title of erudition on their heads, when faced with a dragon that could easily live for thousands of years, their so-called erudition was nothing but a joke. Even in the multiverse, the inheritance of knowledge obtained by a dragon through its bloodline was considered top-notch knowledge. Regular beings would not even have the chance to learn from it. Ever since it was imprisoned in this cramped and lowly place, the Thunder Dragon Arms had pondered countless times on how to deal with the human magus interrogation and torture. Being wise and farsighted, it had even thought of a strategy to deal with it. However, to its astonishment, the human wizard only appeared once to seal it, and then left behind a hateful elemental puppet to continuously bleed it. There was no attempt to persuade it, nor was there any vicious coercion. It was as if the human magus only treated it as a powerful resource point. Apart from letting it bleed, there was nothing else he could do. This undoubtedly caused the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon to become paranoid. With the great strength of the dragon race, any human magus who caught them would not be willing to cut them into pieces, only to obtain some insignificant dragon card resources. Dragon blood, dragon tendons, dragon meat, dragon bones, dragon crystals. Although these things were valuable, how could they compare to a living rank 3 dragon? Arms was confident that the human magus was only using this to break its defenses. If the Thunder Dragon could no longer withstand the torture, the human magus would take the opportunity to propose some frightening conditions. For example, the partner contract, the secrets of the dragon race, or the knowledge of the dragon race. As a pure-blooded colossal dragon and the pride of the Thunder Dragon race, it absolutely couldn't accept any of the options above. Even if it faced death, it would never accept it. But if he didn't agree to the enemy's conditions and wanted them to release him unconditionally, the difficulty of such a negotiation was no less than the former. Therefore, after thinking about it, seeing that Grimm was about to leave, the Thunder Dragon Arms, who thought himself to be calm, finally couldn't help but speak. Hearing the stubborn Thunder Dragon speak, Grimm stopped in his tracks. "You can't give me what I want. If you don't say it, how do you know that I can't give it to you? I want you." Grimm looked at Arms and said straightforwardly, "Don't even think that the great bloodline of the Thunder Dragon will bow its head to a weak human, even if you're a wizard," Thunder Dragon Arms said without hesitation. "Then what's there to talk about?" Grimm's lips curled up as he prepared to leave again. "Wait!" Lightning Dragon Arms couldn't help but shout. It exerted a little force, and the rune chain immediately lit up with a series of runes. Armas instantly felt the pain of his flesh being burned. Lightning Dragon Arms hissed in pain, but he didn't dare to move his body at all. Only when the runes on the rune chain gradually extinguished did he slowly crawl out of the abyss of pain. Although I can't serve you, but I can use my servant as a substitute." It seemed that the counterattack from the spell just now had really hurt him. He couldn't even speak properly. Upon hearing this, Grimm raised his eyebrows and turned to look at Dragonman Zacha, who was in the other light pillar. When Zacha was first brought into the sealed room, he was in an indescribably miserable state. After being trapped underground for more than 10 days, it had already become the reserve rations of the Thunder Dragon's master. The flesh on the lower half of its body had almost been gnawed clean, and even the upper half of its body had been gnawed to a horrible state. When he first brought Zacha back, Grimm wasn't even sure if he could save him. After all, this kind of injury was too unimaginable and terrifying. But it had to be said that the Dragonians were indeed half-dragons. Even with such a serious injury, with the help of Gargamel, who was a dabbler in alchemy, he was able to come back to life and even recover to the point where he was almost fully recovered. Originally, Grimm thought that Zacha would hate Lightning Dragon Arms to the core and would easily surrender to him. But who would have thought that this Grade 2 Dragonian Zacha was such a blockhead? No matter how Grim and Gargamel instigated it, it didn't say a word, still obediently obeying Thunder Dragon Armstrong's every command. At this point, Grim couldn't help but admit that the binding power of bloodlines on most creatures was far beyond his imagination. Originally, Grim had given up on Zacha and had given up on the idea of subduing him. But who would have thought that Lightning Dragon Arm's words would give him a new glimmer of hope? Even though he was ecstatic, Grim's cold and handsome face didn't show it. Instead, he sneered in disdain. "You're a grade 3 dragon. And now you want to use a grade 2 Dragonian to replace you? Do you think all magi are brainless fools?" Towards the end, Grim's tone became harsh. "Of course not. Of course not." A dignified giant dragon lord was actually being reprimanded by a mere human magus. If it was in the past, Lightning Dragon Arms would have spat out a mouthful of dragon breath and blasted him into nothingness. But now, he could only be careful and explain in a submissive tone. "I will give you a fortune that will satisfy you in exchange for my freedom." "The fortune of the Dragon Clan?" Hearing this, Grim couldn't help but mutter to himself. Everyone in the multiverse knew that the Dragon Clan was very good at accumulating wealth. Every dragon would live with their parents when they were young, but once they matured, they would be chased out by their parents and forced to live on their own. The most direct reason behind this was not because the male or female dragon wanted them to be independent, but because they were afraid that they would covet the wealth they had painstakingly plundered. Hence, once a dragon matured, they would build a nest and plunder the wealth of other intelligent beings. Human cities, elven trees, dwarven castles, gnome crypts, even powerful magical creatures that were weaker than them would be plundered by the dragons. Gold, jewels, rare ores, divine weapons, magic gems, and all items that contained powerful elemental energy. These were the dragon's favorite targets to plunder and plunder. When the amount of wealth a dragon had plundered reached its limit, it would become increasingly lazy and cautious. It would spend all day in its nest, lying on top of its piles of treasures and sleeping soundly. During this period, dragons were the most unwilling to leave their nest, and they were also the most powerful. Hence, Grim's heart palpitated at Arm's suggestion, and he looked at the lightning dragon suspiciously. "Arms, as far as I know, you are still a young dragon. Also, this invasion of the Goblin Plain seems to be the first time you've come out of your nest to plunder. Do you have any wealth in your nest?" Arm's expression crumbled at Leyland's words. It did not expect this young human magus to have such comprehensive information on it. It would be difficult to deceive Leyland now. "I have some wealth in my nest." Arms felt like he had lost all face after lying to a lowly creature for the first time. "Is that enough to redeem a grade 3 dragon?" Grim asked. For some reason, Lightning Dragon Arms was stammering as he said, It's definitely not enough, but as long as you let me go, I'll definitely borrow enough wealth from my clansmen to redeem myself." For some reason, Lightning Dragon Arms was stammering. "I've never heard of a dragon lending its wealth to its kin. Even the dragon's mate can't do that." Grim no longer doubted Arms this time. He glared at Arms with a ferocious gaze. That's right. For the first time in its life, Arms hated Magi for being so knowledgeable. However, what it hated even more were those bastards from the Dragon Clan who spread the secrets of the Dragon Clan everywhere. In the face of the overbearing gaze of the Magus, even Arms, who had always prided himself on being noble and mighty, felt uneasy. "I can help you steal. I can help you borrow." The Lightning Dragon's tone finally softened. "You mean you're willing to work for me?" Grim was elated. No. Who would have thought that the Lightning Dragon would once again harden its resolve? According to the traditions of our race, pure-blooded dragons are not allowed to become companions, servants, or mounts of other races. If you go against this rule, you will be spurned by the entire race and lose the protection of the dragon god. "You mean you can serve me, but you can't sign any slave contract?" Grim asked tentatively after tasting it for a while. This time, the lightning dragon did not refuse, nor did it affirm his words. Instead, it stared at Grim with a complicated expression, not saying a word. Grim vaguely understood something. The faith and soul of a dragon would always belong to the great and holy dragon god. This was a bottom line that could never be violated. As long as he did not cross this line, Arms was willing to make some concessions to protect his life. Chapter 561. It was the time of the day when the sun was high up in the sky. The originally peaceful market in the vicinity of the blazing cavern suddenly became lively and clamorous. A group of adventurers who had just returned from hunting in the dark forest had luckily brought back 5-winged flying snake eggs. As a result, the market and camp were in a frenzy of bidding. 4 or 5 adventurers with bloodstains on their faces and bodies were joyfully waiting at the side of the auction platform. Every time the crowd around them raised the bid, they would cheer a little. A few trade representatives from various parts of the scattered tower forest were already arguing until their necks were red. They tore open their collars and continuously waved the bidding cards in their hands. The host chosen by the blazing flame monarch was also an acolyte. Although he only had the strength of a high-ranked acolyte, he had an abundance of life experience that didn't match his age. However, the atmosphere today was just too enthusiastic. Even he couldn't help but feel his mouth go dry. However, just as he was yelling at the top of his lungs and preparing to strike the hammer, the scene before his eyes left him indescribably horrified, and he found it hard to control himself. In the distant horizon, a dark mass of figures rolled over like a dark cloud. They had been at the end of the horizon just a moment ago, but in the next moment, they had already arrived in the sky above the market with a deafening roar. Everyone in the market and camp came out of their tents or wooden houses, shielding their eyes with their hands as they silently sized up this group of uninvited fellows. However, when they clearly saw the appearance and attire of the newcomers, their expressions changed, and they began to feel apprehensive. The Vic family. These were all high-ranked vampire magi of the Vic family. There was no lack of veteran adventurers in the camp who had traveled extensively. With just a glance, they quickly recognized the origins of this group. In truth, there were only a few vampire families who wore noble attire and had large bat wings on their back. It was difficult not to recognize them. Moreover, the vampire in the lead had a long and narrow face, a strong nose bridge, thin lips, and a pair of strange silver eyes that shone like the stars of the morning. He wore skinny trousers, a red jacket, and a black high-collared jacket. A black silk cloak with red edges fluttered behind him, giving off a deep impression. The patriarch of the Vic family, the rank 3 vampire Magus Hines? Vic. Someone quickly recognized this famous and powerful tier 3 vampire, exclaiming in surprise before quickly covering his mouth and sneaking out of the camp. A total of 13 vampires had arrived, and one of them was the current patriarch of the Vic family, Heinz Merlin. There were 2 grade 2 vampires, Lester, who had just advanced, and another veteran vampire, Tori. As for the rest, they were all core members of the Vic family. They were also Tier 1 magi to outsiders. Accompanying them was a black-robed, cold-faced, Tier 2 Magus. From the looks of it, it was Magus Forgan from the Salubo family. Such a group of fiendish vampires had descended upon the blazing flame monarch in such a threatening manner. No matter how one looked at it, they didn't seem like guests at all. As a result, the smart Alex in the camp and the bazaar began to retreat to the periphery without a word, exposing the small auction stage and the host that they had surrounded so tightly that not even a drop of water could escape. "Are you someone from the wizard's pagoda below?" Hennis narrowed his eyes, his eerie silver pupils staring at the wizard apprentice. My lord. Greetings. I'm Hua." With a ripping sound, a strange red light flashed. Hennis, who was high up in the air, grabbed at the air with his right hand. 5 deep claw marks appeared on the wizard apprentice's face. I'm not interested in your name. I'm only asking if you're someone from the wizard's pagoda below. If I hear another word of nonsense, I'll crush you to death." A sinister expression appeared on Hennis' long, thin face. The wizard apprentice covered his face and screamed in pain, but when he heard Hennis' threat, he suppressed it and nodded, his body trembling as he said loudly, "Yes, I am." Hennis let out a satisfied, cold smile. "I'll give you 5 minutes to inform Grimm that the Vic family has come looking for him. Tell him to hand over that bitch quickly, then kowtow and admit his mistake. Otherwise, I'll bathe his wizard's pagoda in blood today." Hearing the high-pitched, ear-piercing roar of the level 3 vampire, the sorcerer apprentice was scared silly. He even forgot the sharp pain on his face. He opened his eyes wide in confusion, almost unable to believe his own ears. "The wound on your face has been poisoned by my blood poison. You only have 5 minutes left to live. Run faster, or else." With the reminder, the wizard apprentice vaguely noticed the abnormality of the wound on his face. 5 minutes? How could 5 minutes be enough to pass through the flame cave to the lava hall, then enter the flame monarch's wizard's pagoda? But his own life was at stake, so the sorcerer apprentice couldn't care less about these things. He activated the agility-hastening spell on the ring on his little finger and poured the antidote into his mouth frantically. In the blink of an eye, he passed through the market and entered the flame cave. "There's no way he'll make it to the wizard's pagoda alive," Wizard Forgan said coldly. His tone was so calm and cold that no one would realize he was talking about a matter related to life. A small fry like him doesn't even have the right to speak. If he didn't run so fast, he might be able to live for another 5 minutes. Now, he'll be a puddle of blood in 2 minutes. Hennis laughed coldly. "There seems to be some movement underground." Lester, who had been standing respectfully behind Hennis, couldn't help but remind him. Ever since they arrived, a surging ball of elemental flames had begun to rumble 200 meters below their feet. It seemed like the Flame Monarch's wizard's pagoda had sensed their presence and began to extract the energy from the elemental pool to increase the defense of the wizard's pagoda. Seeing that these powerful wizards were here to cause trouble, the people in the campsite who were secretly observing immediately scattered like birds and beasts, fleeing into the forest in the distance. Even the vampires had no interest in slaughtering these normal people who relied on the wizard's pagoda to survive. Instead, it was the leader of the Vic family, Hennis, who was secretly preparing to escape with their spoils of war, who let out a soft gasp of surprise. Suddenly, the snake egg in the hands of the 5 magically flew into the sky as if it had grown wings and landed in Hennis' hands. "Winged flying snake's egg?" Hennis lifted his nose and sniffed, then casually broke the eggshell and sucked in the egg white. "The energy aura isn't strong, but the smell is quite fresh. Here, take this magical crystal and leave. I'll be taking these snake eggs." In the next second, a sparkling magical crystal tumbled down from the sky and landed in front of the team of 5 adventurers. 5 eggs from a level 1 winged flying snake were only worth 1 magical crystal? The burly man's face turned red, and he wanted to step forward to argue, but he was dragged away by his teammates, whose expressions changed drastically. They picked up the magical crystal and slipped away without looking back. In an instant, the temporary campsite that could normally accommodate 400 to 500 people became a deserted area. The 13 vampires flapped their bat wings and landed lightly on the ground, while Hennis landed on a scarlet carpet spread out by his clansmen. In the next second, a black high-backed chair appeared behind him, and Hennis sat down gracefully. As soon as he opened his right hand, a glass of scarlet wine was handed to him. Hennis elegantly crossed his legs and brought the goblet to his nose. He gently sniffed the aroma of the scarlet wine as it vibrated. He slightly narrowed his silver eyes and quietly waited for the enemy to appear. A mere rank 2 fire magus was definitely not his match. The speed of a rank 3 vampire flying at full speed was not something an ordinary person could imagine. Even killing a rank 2 fire magus didn't take more than 3 seconds. Hennis even doubted whether the fire magus would be able to see his movements clearly before he died. Perhaps this would make the fire magus die too quickly, and there wouldn't be any pain. In that case, he would use the slowest movements to slowly crush him to death, and let him have a taste of how death befalls him. Just as the vampires were patiently waiting, a flaming door slowly opened in an empty space in front of the blazing flame cave. 2 magi of completely different sizes walked out from within. Grim. Behind Hennis, the newly promoted Lester recognized Grim at a glance, and could not help but call out his name hatefully. However, without the orders of the leader, he did not dare act on his own. Thus, he could only stare at the other party with bloodshot eyes. They were naturally the 2 leaders of the Blazing Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda, Grim and Gargamel. When the flaming door slowly dissipated, Gargamel raised his withered old face and carefully sized up the team in front of him. Although he already knew the origins and objectives of his enemies from within the Blazing Flame Monarch, he still felt his heart tremble when faced with such a powerful team without any obstructions. If not for the Blazing Flame Monarch casting a layer of mental protection on him from afar, Gargamel's teeth would have chattered and his legs would have gone limp, unable to suppress the fear in his heart. Compared to Gargamel, the rank 2 Grim was much more powerful. Relying on the protection of the Blazing Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda, Grim's body emitted a faint layer of fiery light. Within 10 miles of the Blazing Flame Monarch, any enemy that wanted to deal with him would have to first break through this layer of flame barrier. This was the exclusive benefit of Grim as the leader of the Wizard's Pagoda. Facing this group of powerful vampires that came uninvited, Grim's face showed no fear. Instead, he raised his head and greeted the familiar face in the sky. Chapter 562. Faced with Grim's warm invitation, Wizard Forgan's expression was both awkward and solemn. After a moment's hesitation, Forgan finally spoke. "Wizard Grim, since you haven't signed a new service contract with our family after advancing to level 2, I'm here today to inform you that you and your subordinates no longer belong to the Salubo family." Wizard Forgan had obviously used some kind of spell on his last sentence. Not only did the people present hear it clearly, even the adventurers and mercenaries that had escaped into the nearby forest, as well as the wizards and apprentices in the Flame Monarch's Wizard Pagoda could hear it clearly. In that moment, many wizards and apprentices in the Flame Monarch's Wizard Pagoda gasped. Everyone's emotions became restless. A large group of vampires had come looking for trouble, and the main family, the Salubo family, had kicked Grim out. This time, the Flame Monarch was in trouble. As members of the Blazing Flame Monarch, would they be able to escape this calamity? No one was willing to put up with a problem that involved their own lives. Thus, in Grim's senses, the Flame Monarch was like a raging volcano. All sorts of angry and pessimistic emotions were suddenly released, sweeping toward the master of the Wizard's Pagoda. Of course, the ones who reacted the most strongly were the resident wizards. They were not core wizards of the Flame Monarch, and had only chosen to become resident wizards because they coveted the benefits, or because they wanted a place to stay. Now that the Wizard's Pagoda was facing a crisis of life and death, they were naturally the most unstable. To be honest, they would never agree to fight to the death against the vampires of the Wick family for the sake of the Flame Monarch. Thus, with the control crystal of the Wizard's Pagoda, Grim received countless resignation applications from the internal department. Among them were wizards, apprentices, pharmacists, herbalists, beast tamers, skinner, and cobblers employed by the Wizard's Pagoda. Some of the more impatient ones did not even wait for Grim's reply before packing their bags and running away. A moment later, a large group of people rushed out of the flame cave, bowing to Grim, Gargamel, and the vampires in front of them. They shouted, "I'm not a member of the Wizard's Pagoda," and then scattered. Among the crowd, Gargamel naturally saw many familiar faces. These resident sorcerers would usually flatter the Gargamel Deputy Tower Master to fight for resources and benefits for themselves. However, now that the blazing flame monarch was in danger, they were the fastest to run. Gargamel's attention was on the group of sorcerers, while Grimm's attention was on a strange figure mixed in the crowd. After he left the flame cave, he did not scatter into the surrounding forest like the others. Instead, he flew up and quietly stood behind Wizard Forgan. Although the other party was wearing a black robe with a hood hanging low, Grimm could still recognize him through the familiar soul undulations. The blazing flame monarch's tower magus. He was one of Grimm's oldest apprentices. The other party's current attitude had clearly revealed his true identity. It seemed like the Solubo family had been keeping an eye on Grimm ever since he returned from the night plane. This M was also very patient, being able to hide beside Grimm for so long. From this, it could be seen that the Solubo family knew everything that had happened in the blazing flame monarch. It was all thanks to Magus Am. In that moment, Grimm and Gargamel were like rocks in a small stream. Countless magi, acolytes, and craftsmen rushed out of the flame cave, fleeing into the surrounding forest. This caused the two figures that stood proudly to seem lonely and desolate. Hennis, who was leisurely sitting on a black high-backed chair, gently swirled the glass in his hand. His slender, cold, and pale face was filled with an unconcealable sneer of disdain. This was the atmosphere he had deliberately created. Before he killed his target, he wanted to let them taste the feeling of betrayal and the pain of defeat. This was the only way to make up for the humiliation they had suffered from destroying a vampire manor in the Vic family's territory. Lester, who was one of the parties involved, also laughed coldly. Ever since the incident in the Rose Manor half a month ago, he felt a mountain of pressure whenever he thought of that female vampire's talent, making it hard for him to eat or sleep. If he was allowed to continue growing like this, the backlash of his bloodline would become a foreseeable fact. Thus, even if it meant risking his own reputation, he had to use the power of his family to completely eradicate this hidden danger. Thus, when the crowds of people fled the Flame Monarch's wizard tower, Lester was undoubtedly the most worried of all the attacking vampires. His bloodshot eyes widened as he scanned the crowd fleeing the flame cave, afraid that the female vampire would take the opportunity to sneak out. Wizard Forgan, who was standing silently on the horizon, was undoubtedly the most embarrassed of all. Although he didn't object to the decision made by Lord Senazar himself, he felt that it was too rash and heartless. It was true that Hennis, who had brought a large number of subordinates to Ferdinand City to denounce them, was not easy to deal with, but that didn't mean that he would abandon a rank 2 magus. Although the conflict between the higher-ups of the Cerubo family and Grimm had been going on for a long time, no one in the outside world knew about it. No matter how dignified Wizard Forgan's explanation was, in the eyes of outsiders, the Cerubo family was cold-blooded and heartless for abandoning a high-grade magus that belonged to them. This would be a huge blow to the reputation of the Cerubo family. Forgan also felt that this Grimm in front of him wasn't the kind of brainless idiot who would walk to his own death. Since he dared to provoke a vampire family with a rank 3 magus, he had to have some sort of way to deal with it. To be honest, even if the Cerubo family removed his backup and cut all ties with him, it would still be wishful thinking for the vampires to destroy Grimm with just the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda beneath his feet. A powerful magus with the support of the Wizard's Pagoda would definitely be able to unleash power beyond everyone's imagination. Grimm might not be able to defeat the rank 3 hinds, but if he hid inside the Wizard's Pagoda, it would be extremely difficult for the vampires to break in. Hence, the most likely outcome was that both sides would fight to the death, and then be forced into a stalemate for a long period of time. The vampires sealed off the perimeter of the Flame Monarch, cutting off all avenues of reinforcements for Grimm. Grimm and a few other magi were trapped in a lone tower. Although it would be difficult for the enemy to break in, they would also be in a predicament of a lack of resources and food. When that time came, Grim and the rest would find it hard to continue. Other than lowering their heads to Lord Sanazar and accepting harsher terms, they would have no one else to turn to for help. At that time, the Sarubo family could intervene in the battle as a mediator. Although they might have to pay more resources, they would have a chance to take in another rank 2 magus and his subordinate. If a rank 2 magus who had been beaten into submission could do this, even Lord Sanazar would wake up laughing in his sleep. "You are Grim, the fire wizard?" Heinz finally asked as he slowly sipped on the blood wine in his hand. His sharp aura penetrated reality, mind, soul, and many other levels, sweeping toward Grim like a raging wave. Grim took a step forward and used his broad body to block Gargamel. The layer of hazy fluorescent light around his body suddenly shone brightly and collided with the mental pressure that was coming at him. Although mental pressure was invisible, under the drive of heinous powerful mental power, it was as if it had a physical form, almost manifesting in the real world. Grim resisted the pressure with the help of the wizard's pagoda's flame barrier, but the ground around him could not withstand the pressure of a rank 3 vampire wizard, and the ground sank by more than half an inch. From an outsider's point of view, it was as if Grim had suddenly become half an inch shorter. Grim felt a chill in his heart. The vampires were not creatures that were known for their mental strength. If he could have such a terrifying mental pressure, then how strong would the mental strength of those elemental sorcerers or spirit sorcerers be? Grim, who had been having a smooth sailing recently, could not help but feel a little apprehensive. The division of ranks in the Magus world was indeed true. The difference of a single rank would often result in a difference of more than 10 times. There was still a terrifying gap between his strength and a rank 3 wizard's. "I would like to express my deepest apologies for what happened in the Rose Manor half a month ago. If you allow me, I hope to compensate your family's losses with a reasonable price." Even in front of a rank 3 wizard, Grim still expressed his opinion in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. "Compensation? Kaki." As if they had heard the funniest joke in the world, the rank 3 wizard Heinz, followed by the rest of the vampires, could not help but laugh maniacally. "Then use your lives to make up for it," as the rank 3 wizard Heinz hissed. All of the vampires rose into the air and charged at Grim and Gargamel like a red cloud. Among them, the 2 rank 2 vampires, Lester and Tori, flew in front of the rest of the rank 1 vampires, their clothes fluttering in the wind. "Go back and take care of the wizard's pagoda. I'll handle this." Grim was indeed worthy of being the leader of the camp. In this critical moment, he was still able to remain calm and collected. He pushed the Gargamel into a flaming gate, and with a wave of his hand, an oddly shaped long staff appeared in his hand. "Magic flame wall. Resistance aura." With a soft shout, 2 defensive flame spells exploded in front of Grim, engulfing all of the attacking vampires. Chapter 563. This is my territory, I call the shots. Elemental wizards specialized in violent elemental attacks, while vampires were like ghosts roaming the battlefield. 2 level 2 vampires fighting a level 2 fire wizard together seemed to have an overwhelming advantage on the surface, but reality was the exact opposite. However, the reality was the exact opposite. Grim, who was isolated, blasted the 2 tier 2 vampires away with his fire spell, not daring to stay in one place for too long. The main reason for this was the protection of the Blazing Flame Monarch Wizard's Pagoda. The Blazing Flame Monarch Wizard's Pagoda was Grim's personal wizard tower, so Grim had unparalleled control over it. Furthermore, the flame barrier created by the Blazing Flame Monarch could reach anywhere within 10 miles of the wizard's pagoda. This meant that Grim did not have to worry about personal defense during battle. If the 2 level 2 vampires could not break through the flame barrier around his body, they could only take a beating without being able to retaliate. Even if they braved Grim's ferocious cannons to launch an attack, they would be completely nullified by the flame barrier created by the projectiles. In order to harm Grim, the two vampires had to increase the power of their attacks to the limit of the flame barrier in an instant. Otherwise, if their attacks could not beat the self-recovery of the flame barrier, they would not be able to harm Grimm even if they attacked for 100,000 years. Unless the wizard's pagoda's elemental energy was depleted. The reason why the wizards of the sorcerer world loved building wizards' pagodas was because of their powerful support in battle. Without an attack that was 10 times stronger than the wizard's pagoda's defense, it would be impossible to break through it. Back in the day, how could the first-generation wizards, who had yet to fully develop their powers, survive the terrifying wave of magic beasts? They relied on the indestructible wizard pagoda and the wizards stationed in the wizard's pagoda. But today, with the support of the wizard's pagoda, Grimm was able to take on the attacks of two vampires of the same level. This also showed how powerful the wizard's pagoda was. A battle between level 2 wizards was terrifying, and the level 1 vampire viscounts had no chance of interfering. The remaining 11 vampire viscounts let out a roar and turned around, charging toward the flame cave like lightning. Since the owner of the wizard's pagoda had been trapped here by the two earls, the defenses of the wizard's pagoda would definitely be weakened. If they were to attack the wizard's pagoda, even if they would not be able to achieve anything, they would at least be able to make the fire wizard unable to fend off attacks from both sides. However, the moment the 11 crimson shadows entered the flame cave, they were struck out by a violent and ferocious wave of lightning before they could even get a clear look at the situation inside. 9 blood shadows shot out and turned into red bats that circled above the fiery cavern while letting out ghostly cries. The 2 blood shadows that fell behind were surrounded by dazzling blue lightning. Before they could escape from the electric net, they were turned into ashes amidst a series of mournful wails. Soon after, a tall and mighty creature that looked like a centaur rushed out of the cave, waving a lightning spear that blocked the entrance of the cave. Bull-sized azure dragon scales, vigorous and thick dragon claws, incomparably tyrannical dragon strength, coupled with the surging power of thunder and lightning, Heinous, who was leisurely watching the battle from the back, raised his eyebrows. The blood wine in his glass suddenly shook a little. Not a centaur, but a draconian, and a pure-blooded draconian with a level 2 lightning element. Where did this Grimm find such a high-quality foreign race? Wizard Forgan, who was standing in mid-air, also froze. He could not help but turn around to look at Wizard Am. "Sir, I've never seen this draconian in the wizard's pagoda before. It might have just appeared in the past few days." Am could feel the anger in Wizard Forgan's eyes. A mysterious level 2 powerhouse. How could he not find out anything about such an important piece of information? This would be an intolerable mistake no matter which spy it was. If Lord Senazar knew that Grimm could find such a powerful foreign race ally, he would definitely reconsider his decision to abandon Grimm. Just as everyone was thinking about this, the 9 level 1 vampires suddenly let out a ghostly howl and rushed into the nearby forest. After a while, they returned with 1 or 2 unconscious human mercenaries in their hands. They quickly gathered together and formed a circle. Then, they tore the human mercenaries in their hands in half. When a large amount of blood splattered out, they chanted a strange witchcraft incantation in unison. A blood-red halo flashed in the sky, and the 2 vampires that had turned into ashes mysteriously emerged from the blood mist. Other than their pale faces and weak aura, they were no different from before. This was probably one of the vampire family's secret resurrection spells. Seeing this, the wizards on the scene could not help but shake their heads and sigh. No wonder these vampire families could survive for thousands of years. Just this resurrection spell alone was not something a normal wizard family could do. With this kind of resurrection spell, it was no wonder these vampires were so fierce in battle. The vampires had sent out 11 vampire viscounts, level 1, and 2 vampire counts, level 2. The other side had also revealed 2 level 2 powerhouses. In terms of strength alone, the vampires no longer had any advantage on the battlefield. If they had the support of the wizard's pagoda, the ones who would be at a disadvantage in a real battle would be the Vic family that had come from afar. The appearance of a level 2 draconian was undoubtedly the most important bargaining chip on the battlefield. Its appearance directly changed the strength of both sides, as well as the crowd's estimation of the outcome of the battle. The Vic family, who had brought out most of their strength, was an ancient vampire family that had existed for thousands of years. If they still could not suppress a fire wizard that had advanced less than half a year ago, the reputation that the Vic family had built up over thousands of years would be instantly destroyed. When that happened, all the wizard families in the scattered forest of towers would see them as weaklings. Anyone would not be able to resist the urge to take a bite out of them. Seeing that the situation was not in their favor, Marquis Hennis, who had been sitting quietly in the back, could no longer sit still. There was no declaration of battle, nor was there any sound of warning. Hennis appeared beside Grimm in a flash along with a streak of bloody light. He waved his claws repeatedly, and the few light claws caused the flame barrier to tremble unceasingly. The AI chip's warnings rang out in Grimm's mind. Beep. Flame barrier has received external attack. Defense has decreased by 13%. Beep. Flame barrier has received external attack. Defense has decreased by 11%. Beep. Flame barrier has received external attack. Defense has decreased by 15%. Multiple warnings rang out one after another, and the defensive strength of the flame barrier projected by the blazing flame monarch's wizard's pagoda fell sharply. Even though the wizard's pagoda was continuously injecting fire energy into the barrier, it could not match the speed and power of the enemy's attacks. Beep. Flame barrier has received external attack. Defense has decreased to 30%, about to shatter. At this moment, Grimm's face turned deathly pale. The AI chip estimated that the Flame Monarch's flame barrier had a defensive strength of at least 1,000 degrees. Coupled with the continuous replenishment of fire energy, it was more than enough to withstand the attacks of double the number of Grade 1 elemental magi. But even such a powerful flame barrier was like an eggshell in the hands of a Grade 3 magus that could be easily crushed with the flick of a finger. Furthermore, this magus was a vampire magus that was publicly acknowledged to be the weakest in terms of attack power. Even though Grimm had imagined the strength of a Grade 3 magus countless times, the information in his mind could not compare to the might of a Grade 3 magus in reality. Grimm was flustered, but he did not panic. He quickly retreated, waving his destructive flames to summon a large meteor shower that covered the surroundings. He knew his limits. Trying to lock onto Hennis' position with a single target spell was a joke. Only a large area of effect flame spell could affect him. Grimm did not expect these spells to harm Hennis. He only hoped to restrict or delay his opponent's attacks, giving him space to dodge. Grimm retreated a few steps, but before he could regroup with Draconid Zacha, the flame barrier around him disappeared with a crisp crack. Hennis' Netherblood Ghost Claw had powerful corrosive properties and terrifying blood poison. The flame barrier of over 1,000 degrees did not even last 5 seconds before it shattered into pieces. Without the flame barrier, Grimm's lava shield of 500 degrees and flame barrier of 200 degrees could not even withstand a single blow. Fortunately, they had bought Grimm half a second of time. Thus, Grimm managed to leap out of the flame barrier with difficulty before Hennis' blood-red claws tore through his throat. This was the most dangerous flame leap he had ever used since advancing to become a magus. As he staggered out from beside Draconid Zacha, he felt a sharp pain in his throat. He had difficulty swallowing, as if he had been struck by the enemy's bloody claws the moment he leapt out. "Quick, retreat to the wizard's pagoda," Grimm yelled in a muffled voice. With the help and protection of Draconid Zacha, they escaped into the flame cave. Perhaps fearing the terrifying speed of the level 3 Hennis, Draconid Zacha even used the most violent lightning storm to cover the entrance of the cave to prevent the enemy from pursuing them. The two supported each other as they ran along the twisting lava tunnel of the flame cave toward the wizard's pagoda 200 meters underground. Marquis Hennis appeared at the edge of the lightning storm like an eerie ghost. He leaned forward slightly, the tip of his tall nose less than 10 centimeters from the edge of the storm. His eerie silver pupils pierced through the raging storm and locked onto the two fleeing figures. Two level 2 magi in his eyes, tier 2 sorcerers, who were feared by the people of the world, were just prey for him to play around with. They could not be considered his opponent. If not for the fact that he was afraid of being destroyed by the full power of a level 2 draconid, he might have caught up to them before they could even run 10 meters. But that was not a big deal. The other party had only extended his life by a dozen or so, and the ending was already set in stone. Sensing the energy level of the lightning storm rapidly decreasing, Hennis's silver pupils became brighter and brighter. When the last bolt of lightning disappeared, Hennis turned into a bloody shadow and disappeared into the pitch-black entrance of the flame cave. Chapter 564. As the screams of the vampires disappeared into the depths of the cave, the outside of the cave returned to its usual silence. Wizard Forgan hesitated for a moment in midair, but he eventually landed with Amu. The appearance of a level 2 draconian had made him a little uneasy. He couldn't help but frown as he looked at the dark entrance of the cave. My lord, although Grimm has the help of a draconian, he is still a level 2. They have no chance of winning against a level 3 Lord Heinous. What are you still worried about? Wizard Amu mustered up his courage and tried to comfort Forgan in a low voice. Humph. What do you know? Wizard Forgan frowned. If Grimm really has no chance of winning, why would he come out? If he hid in the wizard's pagoda, he would not suffer any losses no matter how much the enemy yelled. But he chose to come out and fight us head-on. I can't help but feel like there's a conspiracy going on here. You mean? Wizard Amu's eyes were wide open, a look of disbelief on his face. He had lived in the Flame Monarch for decades. In the end, it was just a beginner's wizard's pagoda. If it wasn't for the Black Forest and the enviable resources of magical beasts and living creatures, it wouldn't have been so popular. As one of Grimm's disciples, Amu was very familiar with the wizard's pagoda. Other than a few forbidden areas that he could not get close to, he had already explored all the other facilities and found nothing out of the ordinary. Some time ago, there was a rumor in the wizard's pagoda that his teacher had organized an invasion of another world. Since he was not involved, he did not know the details. However, it was true that a few core wizards of the wizard's pagoda had gone missing. Meryl, Sabrina, Bliss, Ender, they had never appeared after disappearing from the wizard's pagoda. Grimm and Mary, on the other hand, had reappeared after disappearing for 2 months. Amu did not notice anything out of the ordinary from their mannerisms. The only unusual thing was that half a month ago, there was a problem with the sealing room on the 3rd floor of the wizard's pagoda, and all wizards were temporarily suspended from using it. As the sealing room was very limited, most wizards would only use it a few times in their lives, so it did not attract the attention of the wizards in the wizard's pagoda. If Amu wasn't an observant person, perhaps even he wouldn't have noticed this little detail that had no impact on his life. Now, it seemed that the problem with the sealing room was fake, and that there were more things inside. Dragon people? Could it be that Grimm had intruded into a dragon kingdom? Right when Am couldn't help but let his imagination run wild, his body suddenly swayed, and he became slightly unstable. When he came back to his senses, he realized that it wasn't that he had lost his footing, but the ground had begun to shake violently. In front of him, the originally flat ground suddenly undulated like an earth dragon. It was as if a huge creature had suddenly drilled its way into the ground and was frantically struggling to dig. The earth was like a piece of rag. Countless wrinkles and cracks appeared on its surface before it shattered in an instant. Countless bottomless ravines and hills suddenly appeared, and then shattered into pieces, continuously disintegrating, 100-meter-tall pillar of dust shot out from the densely packed cracks, instantly devouring the camps and markets around the flame cavern. Vaguely, Mu seemed to hear a loud and terrifying dragon roar coming from underground. He must have heard it wrong. There were no dragons near the blazing flame monarch. However, just when Amu was feeling doubtful, Wizard Forgan, who was standing in front of him, suddenly widened his eyes as if he had seen a ghost. Amu might not be able to make a clear judgment, but as a rank 2 magus, there was no way he would make a mistake. The explosion underground was not because the blazing flame monarch had used some large-scale spell, but just as Wizard Forgan's heart was pounding, a loud noise suddenly came from the entrance of the flame cavern. Tons of lava boulders, as well as countless amounts of sand, stones, and soil, were thrown into the air by a tremendous force. Amidst this pillar of mud and dust that was hard to see, two creatures with huge differences in size soared upwards, flying while tangling with each other. Even the thick, dusky dust could not block the bloody scratches of the rank 3 Marquis Hennis underworld blood ghost claw. The extremely dense bloody energy was enough to show that Hennis was going all out. Even so, Hennis Netherblood Ghost Claw still couldn't break through the basin-sized layers of azure dragon scales on his opponent's body. As for the corrosive and blood-poison properties of the underworld blood ghost claw, they were directly dispersed by the blinding lightning on the surface of the Marquis body. Hennis flapped his wings and flew swiftly while dodging his opponent's terrifying bite, pounce, wing strike, tail whip, as well as the frightening short dragon breath. Following a clear and resonant dragon's roar, Hennis, who had been struck by the dragon's aura, paused for a moment before being engulfed by the horrifying wave of lightning. After half a finger, Hennis let out a mournful cry and dragged his charred body out of the lightning. Not daring to stay any longer, the blood energy in his body exploded, and his entire body turned into a strange bloody shadow, disappearing in an instant. At this moment, the terrifying opponent raised its neck and let out another resonant dragon roar in the direction Hennis had escaped. Only then did it flap its huge wings in satisfaction, occupying the sky and soaring to its heart's content. That malevolent dragon horn, those gleaming fangs, that bony and lean body, those thick and powerful dragon claws, those huge and broad dragon wings, and that 8-meter-long bony tail. The proud rank 3 lightning dragon arms proudly soared in the blue sky and white clouds, showing off its majestic body to this mysterious world. Only after flying thrice in the sky to its heart's content did lightning dragon arms notice the two human magi who were staring at it with their mouths wide open, staring at it with a stupefied look in their eyes. Why are there still 2 little bugs here that haven't been chased away? Seeing the 2 wizards opening their mouths to say something, Arms, who was filled with hatred towards wizards, didn't care about what they said. In the next second, a terrifying thunderstorm wrapped around the 2 magi and flung them tens of kilometers away. I can't kill you, but I can at least let you suffer a little. Thinking viciously, the rank 3 lightning dragon arms landed on the ground. The lightning dragon arms landed gracefully on the ground amid the sound of sand and pebbles flying in the air. After the short battle underground, the flame cavern had been completely destroyed by the battle between the 2 Type 3 powerhouses. The entire ground was in a state of desolation. Hot air kept rising from the ground, mixing with the sand and dirt. The air was so dirty that it was hard to breathe. The 2 magi had fought their way up, and the hole they created was covered up by the falling rocks and sand. If Arms wanted to go back underground, he would have to use his dragon claws to dig another way out. Otherwise, he would have to wait for the fire magi to pick him up. Arms squatted on top of the ruins and kept scanning the surroundings. That damn fire magi didn't just ask him to chase away the vampire leader, she also asked him to block the path of retreat of the other vampires. Forcing him, a Tier 3 Thunder Dragon, to serve as a despicable thug was an insult to the great Thunder Dragon race. But for the sake of the precious Dragon Oath gemstone, Arms decided to endure it. Lightning Dragon Arms grumbled angrily while using his power of the will to scan the ground for any abnormalities within a 10-kilometer radius. Abruptly, it straightened its body and stared unblinkingly at a pile of rubble 1,000 meters away from it with a pair of huge, amber-like eyes. As if it had heard something, its huge and strong body instantly soared into the air, and then swooped down with an unstoppable momentum. A muffled sound echoed. The pile of rubble turned into powder under the dragon's huge claws, and a vampire that had just dug out a tunnel was stomped into meat paste in an instant. I was a bit too heavy. Arms couldn't help but be startled. Only now did he remember that the fire magi wanted him alive. He raised his claws and licked the flesh on them. They were weak, and seemed to be a rank 1 vampire. They weren't the target. Relieved, Arms strolled back to his original spot and continued to remain vigilant. With a rank 3 lightning dragon blocking the way, how could the vampires that had swarmed into the ground find a way to escape? The vampires attacking this time were all core members of the Vic family. They were all powerful and skilled in battle, so Grimm didn't send out the magi under him. Instead, he cooperated with the Dragon Man Zacha to search for traces of the vampires in the underground lava passageways that were broken into countless segments. After all, this was the Blazing Flame Monarch's territory. Large amounts of fire eyes were released, and the vampires that were scurrying about in the tunnels were found one by one. Grade 2 against Grade 1, and there were 2 of them at the same time. As such, it was difficult for the vampires to escape once they were targeted. They were all beaten black and blue, then bound up with anti-magic chains and thrown back to the Blazing Flame Monarch. After a thorough search, Grimm's first target, the rank 2 vampire Lester, was finally found in a tunnel less than 10 meters from the surface. After a relaxing, bloody battle, Lester was pierced in the thigh by Zacha's lightning spear and electrocuted into an afro. Only then was he captured by Grimm and brought back to the Blazing Flame Monarch. With Lester here, Grimm couldn't be bothered to chase after another rank 2 vampire. He used a gate of fire to bring Arms back and cut off all contact with the surface. Chapter 565. Blazing Flame Monarch, Giant Dragon, Vampire. When these unrelated nouns were piled together, they became the most explosive terms, instantly attracting the attention of countless people. The leader of the vampire family in the southwest area of the Scattered Tower Forest, Level 3 Heinous? Vic led his people to attack, raising the flag of revenge, swearing to destroy the Blazing Flame Monarch Wizard Pagoda that Grimm had spent so much effort to build. Due to the incident at the Rose Manor, and the silence of the higher-ups of the Cerubo family, the Scattered Tower Forest Wizard Association acquiesced to this attack. A Level 3 vampire was leading the team, and there were 2 Level 2 vampires and 2 official vampires in the team. This kind of power was enough to destroy a small family. Even against mid-sized families that did not have enough resources, this was a powerful team that could not be underestimated. However, it was this team that had been defeated by the private Wizard's Pagoda of an unknown Level 2 wizard. Level 2 powerful Draconians. Level 3 terrifying Thunder Dragons. These strange and unexpected creatures actually appeared one by one in a remote private wizard pagoda. The psychological impact of this was so huge that it was hard for people to accept it. Especially those resident wizards who could not wait to announce that they were leaving the Blazing Flame Monarch before the battle. All of them were filled with regret. In the past, even though the name Fire Demon was famous, it was only briefly praised around the Cerubo family's territory. As Grimm hid in the Blazing Flame Monarch and tried to break through to Level 2, the name Fire Demon was forgotten after decades of silence. However, with the outbreak of this family war and the escape of the Level 3 vampire, the name Fire Demon once again rose to fame, becoming a powerful figure that everyone knew. With the escape of a large number of former members of the Wizard's Pagoda, the process and result of the battle, as well as some hidden information spread throughout the scattered tower forest area. Since the higher-ups of the Cerubo family had already announced that Grimm was no longer a member of their family, with the victory of this battle, a new wizard family would be born in the center of the wizard continent. With the power of this battle, as long as this Grimm stood out and shouted for help, there would definitely be many roaming wizards who would respond. After all, attaching oneself to the side of a newly risen magus meant that the resources and benefits one could obtain would be extremely bountiful. However, what made the sorcerer families even more surprised was how Grimm, a mere Tier 2 sorcerer, managed to summon a Tier 3 thunder dragon. This simply subverted their previous understanding of the greedy and arrogant giant dragons. Of course, there was a rumor circulating in the Magus Circle that Grimm had probably found a small dragon plane, and his allies were his collaborators in the dragon plane. Compared to the other rumors, this piece of information was rather nonsensical, but surprisingly, it was acknowledged by all the Magi. Because only this kind of reality could explain all the doubts. For a moment, the blazing flame monarch, fire demon, Grimm, giant dragon. These terms were all linked together, becoming the hottest topic in the scattered Spire Forest region. Ordinary dignitaries and wealthy merchants naturally used these as topics of conversation during their leisure time and would discuss them enthusiastically from time to time. However, for the Magi who possessed great power and profound knowledge, the entire incident revealed a lot of information that was worth pondering over. Giant dragons had been extinct in the Magus world for tens of thousands of years. Although the large Magus families and organizations had control of a portion of the Dragon Plane's world waymarks, most of them chose to keep it a secret and would not easily make it public. Even if other Magi coveted the so-called dragon pet, they could only regret it. Now, they had actually heard of clues about giant dragons from a newly advanced Magus. Many Magi who lacked powerful magic pets or mounts could not help but feel excited. Hence, after the battle of the blazing flame monarch, many powerful Magi could not help but cast their gazes towards the remote and desolate dark forest. However, since that battle had destroyed all paths to the blazing flame monarch, they could only suppress their restless emotions and quietly wait for Grimm to reappear. They refused to believe that Grimm would not be tempted if they used magic crystals and resources to buy a dragon. As long as they could obtain a dragon pet that they were satisfied with, many Magi would not mind spending their savings over 100 years. Strength. In the Magus world, only strength was the foundation that determined everything. A powerful dragon pet was undoubtedly a part of a Magus' personal strength. Blazing Flame Monarch. Regardless of the commotion in the outside world, the Wizard's Pagoda was still bustling with activity. To be honest, those who could remain in the Wizard's Pagoda and face the challenge together with Grimm when the vampire family attacked would become the core strength of Grimm's faction in the future. After the battle, Gargamel calculated that there were only 54 people left in the Wizard's Pagoda after the battle. There were 5 Magi, 29 apprentices, and 20 servants of the Wizard's Pagoda. However, what moved Grimm the most was not the Magi and apprentices, but the Medusa he had subdued in the dark forest. Hearing that the Wizard's Pagoda was about to be attacked by another powerful Magus faction, Medusa had brought her snake demon subordinates to the blazing flame monarch without hesitation to help. She had no idea about the existence of the Draconians and Lightning Dragons. As for the other 2 subsidiary factions of the blazing flame monarch, the Manticore family and the Demon Dog tribe, they were more ambiguous and procrastinating. However, it was fortunate that the Manticore leader had been loyal during the battle in the Flame Cave, severely delaying the assault of the vampires. As such, Grimm had listed it as one of the heroes of the tower's defense. As for the other Demon Dog tribe, the 3-headed devil hound Angugia, it was clearly ambivalent. Even though it had received orders before the battle, it had been dragging its feet, only arriving near the blazing flame monarch halfway through the battle. Only when it saw the tide turn and victory was in the wizard's pagoda's favor did it rush out like a gust of wind to help the blazing flame monarch clean up the mess. Of course, Grimm was aware of all of this. Even though he did not say anything on the surface, he had already sentenced the three-headed devil hound Angugia to death in his heart. If there was a chance in the future, the job of sending people to their deaths to scout the way would definitely fall on its head. Even though the wizard's pagoda had become much quieter after the victory, it was still filled with jubilation. Gargamel waved his hand and opened up the storeroom, bringing out countless delicacies and wine to reward the future backbone of the family that had stood firm on his side. As for Grimm, Gargamel was dead set on him. Gargamel had thought that everyone in the blazing flame monarch would not be able to escape this crisis of destruction, and had already mentally prepared himself for death. But who knew that the mysterious Master Grimm had unknowingly convinced the Draconians and Lightning Dragons, allowing them to become the Wizard's Pagoda's hidden soldiers and powerful reinforcements at the most critical moment. No matter how powerful a level 3 vampire was, it was impossible for him to defeat a level 3 lightning dragon. With the powerful individual strength of the giant dragon tribe, it was not difficult for them to easily defeat a few human wizards of the same level. In fact, some of the more powerful giant dragons even had the ability to challenge those of a higher level. In this multiverse with high mana, it seemed that only a powerful creature like the giant dragon could have such a heaven-defying ability. Furthermore, through this crisis, the blazing flame monarch had also gotten rid of a hidden traitor. This would undoubtedly be of great benefit to the future development of Grimm's faction. Naturally, there would be rewards after the victory. Grimm personally announced during the celebration banquet that he would be forming a new wizard family, and that everyone present would become the core members of the new family. This included Medusa and the leader of the Chimeras. In the future, they would rid themselves of their identity as wild magical beasts and become official members of a wizard family. As long as this wizard family gained the recognition of the Scattered Wizard Tower Forest Association, they would also gain the status of wizards. Under everyone's anticipation, Grimm also announced the name of the new family, Crimson. Grimm was a fire wizard, and he was most proficient in fire spells. Thus, it was fitting for him to give himself the name Crimson. From now on, Grimm's name would become the new Grimm? Crimson. He would also become a powerful Crimson Wizard. The secret room on the 5th floor of the Blazing Flame Monarch. At this moment, Grimm had turned this place into the scene of a mysterious ceremony. While the overjoyed Magi and Acolytes were still celebrating in the hall on the 2nd floor, Grimm had already brought Mary and Lester here. Alice and the little elf Helen were already waiting inside, having been teleported here from the Tower of Destiny. "It's you again, you thief. You're not satisfied with Alice, and you've even hooked up with a female vampire. Don't you know that those vampires are all perverts?" The moment they met, the elf Helen flew in front of Grimm, wrapped in a glowing ribbon of light. She stuck her hands on her hips and pointed at his nose, her sharp voice scolding him. This sudden accusation left Grimm dumbfounded. He was currently carrying the unconscious Mary in one hand, and Lester, who was bound and unable to move, in the other. Looking at the elf in front of him who seemed to be in the right, he opened his mouth a few times, but did not know how to defend himself. "Helen, don't show off that specious theory of yours. It's not your place to interfere in our affairs." Alice, who had been standing there with a smile, slowly walked up to the unconscious Mary and asked in confusion, "What happened to her?" "Half a month ago, she absorbed too much of the Thunder Dragon's blood. She's been sleeping all this time, and no matter how I call her, she won't wake up," Grimm explained awkwardly. "She has the blood of vampires flowing in her body, so she needs some special witchcraft facilities. Fortunately, I brought the blood coffin this time. Otherwise, most of the power would have dissipated, and it would have been a great loss for her. Ever since Alice became a Destiny Witch, although she was still as strong in front of others, she was much gentler and calmer in private. The blood coffin was a witchcraft item unique to the vampires. It could help vampires condense and purify their blood. However, due to its high price, only high-grade vampires had the right to use it. If it's just an ordinary blood exchange ritual, even an idiot like you can complete it. Why would Alice need to specially teleport here? This was the level-up ritual that Alice had specially prepared for that female vampire. Besides, wasn't it easy to get the blood moon? Alice is the witch of destiny. If she says it's the blood moon, then it's the blood moon. What's so strange about that? At this point, it seemed that a certain question had poked Helen's sore spot. Although the little elf was reprimanding Grim, her beautiful eyes were filled with tears. Grim's expression darkened. He silently nodded and quietly left the secret chamber. Grim had heard of the blood moon prayer ceremony before. It was usually a grand ceremony held when high-level dark creatures advanced in rank. Dark creatures that successfully passed this ceremony could not only purify their bloodline and advance smoothly, but also obtain some special abilities. Moonlit Night Invisibility, Moon Shadow Envoy, Shadow Blade, Moon Fantasy Wings, Moonlight Recovery. These were the abilities that could be obtained through the Blood Moon Prayer Ceremony. Although they were not heaven-defying, they were all quite useful. Whether it was the ability to hide in the moonlit night, the terrifying critical damage of Moon Shadow Envoy, the strange and hard to defend against Shadow Blade, the fast escape speed of Moon Fantasy Wings, or the super strong recovery of Moonlight Recovery. Any one of them could greatly increase Mary's battle power in the dark. There was always a loss for every gain. If one wanted to obtain additional abilities, they would have to pay a high price. Apart from the large amount of precious resources needed for the ceremony itself, the host of the ceremony had to consume even more. There was no blood moon in the sorcerer world. If Alice wanted to successfully complete the blood moon prayer ceremony for Mary, she would have to use her own power of destiny to make this prophecy come true. As a witch of destiny, the only thing Alice could pay for was her hard-earned power of destiny and her own life. This was why the price was high. While Grim was waiting anxiously outside the secret room, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. He raised his head and looked through the sturdy walls of the wizard's pagoda, as well as the 200-meter-thick layer of earth. He cast his gaze toward the distant sky. It was late at night, the time when the moon hung high in the sky and the stars dotted the sky. However, at some point in time, a layer of hazy bloody mist had already enveloped most of the horizon, causing the originally bright and silvery moonlight to actually turn into a dizzying and strange bloody color. The mountains were blood red, the ground was blood red, the trees were blood red, even the massive moon in the sky had become blood red, the entire world had become a blood red world. Such a strange scene only existed within 10 miles of the Flame Monarch's wizard's pagoda. Once they stepped out of this area, the black forest and silver-white moonlight would return to their original state. The people in the pagoda were still cheering and celebrating. Only the forest demon Ava, Medusa, and a few other high-level dark creatures could faintly feel that something was different. It was as if their bodies had become lighter, and the energy in their bodies flowed more smoothly. The air they breathed seemed to be filled with an indescribable fragrance of blood. Apart from the few of them, in a secret room on the 3rd floor of the wizard's pagoda, a sweet-looking little girl was climbing to a narrow stone window with great difficulty. Through the long and narrow space, she could sense the radiance of the moon shining down from the blood moon from afar, separated by layers of obstructions. All of the blood moon's moonlight was directed by a strange force into the top level of the wizard's pagoda. There seemed to be a special ritual going on there. The little girl looked like she was only 3 or 4 years old, but she had wisdom and thoughts that did not match her age. Sensing the pure energy within the blood moon's moonlight that made her salivate, the little girl tilted her face and bit her tender, white fingers as she pondered for a long time. Finally, unable to suppress her desire for the blood moon's energy, She extended her hand and beckoned. The next moment, the blood moon's energy that flowed endlessly into the top level of the wizard's pagoda suddenly split into a small tributary and guided the energy into the little girl's body. When the blood light entered her body, the little girl immediately beamed with joy. The big sister upstairs has such a good physique, she definitely won't mind if I steal a little of her stuff. If she really does mind, there's still my silly father and clumsy mother who can help me deal with it. Yes, she'll definitely be fine. It was unknown if the little girl was planning for herself or just muttering to herself, but after a moment's thought, she started absorbing the energy without any regard for anything else. How could the changes that occurred in the middle of the blood moon's torrent escape the eyes and ears of Grim and Alice? Alice was the host of the ritual, and she naturally knew the changes in the blood moon's energy that came from her hands. In the instant that the little girl could not help but extend her hand to steal the blood moon's moonlight, Alice suddenly raised her head and looked at the horizon in confusion. She then looked in confusion at where the little girl was. After a moment's thought, she did not react immediately. Grim was the one who sensed it at the same time as Alice. As the master of the wizard's pagoda, he was undoubtedly the most sensitive to the flow of energy within the wizard's pagoda. When a small tributary of the blood moon's energy suddenly diverged, Grim immediately sensed that something was wrong and flew into a rage. Someone actually dared to interfere in the wizard ritual that he was protecting. If they disturbed the blood moon prayer ritual and caused Mary's efforts to fail due to the lack of energy, Grim would definitely explode in anger. Suppressing his anger, Grim's mental perception followed the tributary of energy and passed through the walls of the wizard's pagoda. It passed through the protective spells and landed on the body of the strange little girl. Who is she? Why have I never seen her before? Grim's doubts had just arisen, but he quickly understood with the AI chip's reminder. This was the room of the forest demon Ava, and he also knew this little girl, as it was Grim who had given birth to her. But logically speaking, the baby girl that the forest demon gave birth to should only be 4 or 5 months old, while the little girl in front of him was clearly 4 or 5 years old. If not for the fact that the AI chip's recorded soul ripples matched the information of the spiritual consciousness, Grim would have suspected that the baby girl had been replaced by someone else while he was away from the wizard's pagoda. What made Grim even more surprised was that the little girl in front of him already had the mental strength of a quasi-wizard. To have the mental strength of a quasi-wizard at just 4 or 5 months old, this little girl's talent for growth was astonishing. Even though it was a little strange, she was clearly the daughter of Gargamel and the forest demon Ava. Understanding this, Grim, who was filled with anger, could only suppress his anger and use his authority as the master of the wizard's pagoda to cut off the energy of the blood moon that the little girl was drawing out. Little girl, didn't your parents tell you that you can't steal things from others? Grim's cold mental pressure shot into the little girl's soul. I'm only warning you this time. If there's a next time, I'll punish you severely. How could a 5-year-old girl withstand the spiritual pressure of a rank 2 magus? Even if she had extraordinary talent, she could not face a powerful level 2 wizard head-on, not even in the aftermath. The little girl was so frightened that she started crying loudly, falling to the ground. Sensing the commotion in her room, the forest demon Ava, who was still in the banquet hall on the 2nd level, immediately rushed back like a gust of wind. She hugged the little girl the moment she entered the room. Amelia, my little sweetheart, my little baby. What's wrong with you? Did some bastard bully you? The forest demon Ava, who was anxious to protect her child, spoke without thinking, leaving Grim, whose consciousness was wandering around the room, speechless. Ava, take care of your little girl. She's already interrupted Mary's blood moon prayer ceremony. Oh, the ceremony seems to have come to an end. We'll talk about this later. Grim's consciousness had only communicated with the forest demon Ava halfway when he suddenly retreated in a hurry. At this moment, the little girl Amelia, who was lying in the arms of the forest demon Ava, pursed her lips and muttered to herself, "You've only intercepted a little and you're already chasing after me, how petty." But when the forest demon Ava hugged her and looked into her eyes, the little girl's expression had already changed to one of fear and unease. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.